Chapter 861. It wasn't appropriate for the other Golden Immortal Realm cultivators to speak, but the relationship between the Martial Emperor and Luo Fan was especially different, so he was naturally the one to speak. First published, the Martial Emperor immediately asked, "Brother Luo, may I know what's the taboo of destroying this test? And will the following test be like this as well?" Luo Fan naturally knew that this was the question that everyone had in common. So he didn't beat around the bush and grinned as he said, "Even though this forbidden area isn't as vast and grand as the last era, the projection is countless times more realistic than the projection of the entire era in the previous tests. When this forbidden area is destroyed, the resistance of this forbidden area wouldn't be inferior to the resistance of the projection of the entire era in the previous tests. Besides that, after this forbidden area is destroyed, the quintessence of this forbidden area will invade the person who destroyed it. And it's just like the backlash from the information when the projection of the era was destroyed. If one's unable to endure it, then one would be completely assimilated by the quintessence and lose oneself. As for what the following tests are like, I don't know, but I presume it's probably similar." Even though he didn't directly answer the Martial Emperor's question about the taboo of the forbidden area of destruction, his words had already explained the answer that everyone wanted to know. The numerous Golden Immortal Realm cultivators present here weren't puzzled by Luo Fan's simple answer, and they'd understood how special the tests in the forbidden area were instead. After they understood this, the expressions of all the Golden Immortal Realm cultivators and even the Martial Emperor changed greatly. After they'd experienced over 3,000 tests from before, they'd long since become clearly aware of how formidable and unbelievable the backlash from the final information from the projection of the era was. Golden Immortal Realm cultivators like them were utterly unable to endure the backlash from the boundless information, and even the strongest Martial Emperor would be completely lost beneath the backlash. The reason why they were able to recover from the information backlash was that they were able to do so. Although the information backlash was shocking, it didn't have too much destructive power. It couldn't burst their divine souls in an instant, and it couldn't destroy them. They had a long time to find clues from the endless information. Then, they would be able to sort out the information. However, according to what Luo Fan said, the backlash from the following tests wasn't just information, but the quintessence of the forbidden area instead. It wasn't just information. It also contained boundless yuan qi, boundless energy, boundless laws, and the fundamental source of laws. That was an existence that absolutely had the power to wipe out all living beings, an existence that possessed absolute explosive destructive power. If the strength of such a fundamental origin was as strong as the final information backlash of the past projection checkpoint, none of them would be able to withstand such a backlash. He would definitely be instantly assimilated by the backlash of the fundamental origin. Such a fact. This meant that even if they did their best in this trial and were the first to find the core and have the qualifications to destroy the trial, they would not be able to destroy the forbidden area. He was unable to obtain the benefits of breaking through the checkpoint of the forbidden area. How could they maintain their composure in this situation? Luo Fan stood there, looking at everyone's expressions. He knew what they were thinking. He faintly smiled and said, "Although it is difficult to defend against the origin source, it is impossible to resist it. However, if he was able to completely refine and absorb it, then he would naturally be able to completely obtain the essence of the forbidden area and comprehend the grand Tao contained within it. Presumably, this is an extremely rare opportunity for all of you, fellow Taoists." As soon as Luo Fan's words entered their ears, the eyes of these connate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators lit up. In an instant, the disappointment was replaced by fighting spirit. A forbidden land must contain boundless nomological laws. It must be a manifestation of a certain aspect of the great Tao. If they could obtain it completely, it would be extremely beneficial to them. It was not just a rare opportunity, it was a great blessing. After all, even though everyone present here was a connate Golden Immortal Realm cultivator that had arrived at an extremely profound forbidden area, it could be said that every single one of them had encountered a bottleneck in their cultivation. Under such circumstances, Even if the great Tao contained in those forbidden lands was not complete and was not universally applicable, it was still a huge boost to their cultivation. There was even a high possibility that it could directly break through the bottleneck they were currently facing. It was obvious how tempting such a fact was to connate golden immortal realm cultivators like them. With such enormous benefits in front of them, even if they were clearly aware that they were absolutely unable to endure the backlash from the quintessence of the forbidden area and would definitely be completely assimilated by it, they were still unwilling to give up. Instead, they aroused the thought of finding some special techniques to allow themselves to endure this sort of backlash. Even though connate golden immortal realm cultivators were unable to truly attain omnipotence. But if they knew what their objective was, then any connate golden immortal realm cultivator would more or less be able to find some methods to accomplish it. Of course, it was difficult to say if these methods were complicated, if they took many detours, or if they were unnecessary. For example, if a connate golden immortal realm cultivator wanted to turn back time and return to the past, then they were able to accomplish it through various methods. However, to connate golden immortal realm cultivators that didn't have a deep understanding of the essence of space, perhaps they would have to exhaust a myriad of materials and prepare for over 1,000,000 or even 1,000,000,000,000 years before they could accomplish it. They were even able to accomplish traversing through time without any foundation, let alone anything else. For example, resisting the backlash from the quintessence of the forbidden area was obviously the same for them. If they were willing to disregard the price, then any one of them would be able to accomplish it. It was just that different cultivators used different methods with different prices. The reason they were disappointed when they didn't know what benefits the quintessence brought to them was because they felt that the price they paid wasn't proportional to the benefits they obtained. It caused them to be unwilling to pay that price, and they were even more willing to give up on it. When he saw the numerous connate golden immortal realm cultivators were filled with fighting spirit, Luo Fan understood that they would absolutely not be filled with negative emotions anymore. With a command in his heart, he raised his hand and pointed forward. The sphere formed from the 6 absolutes nebula rumbled before instantly exploding into pieces. It transformed into a strange gray mist that covered an area of 300 m, and it surged before Luo Fan. The gray mist was extremely profound. It contained boundless laws, and even boundless energy. It was even to the extent that there were countless living beings within it. Shockingly, it was the appearance of the 6 Absolutes Nebula. After the miniature version of the 6 Absolutes Nebula appeared, Luo Fan didn't hold back at all. He released his own energy and continuously poured it into the miniature version of the 6 Absolutes Nebula. He constantly assimilated it, causing the miniature version of the 6 Absolutes Nebula to seem like it was constantly melting during the process. It was shrinking at a rapid speed. Every single one of the connate golden immortal realm cultivators present had lived for hundreds of millions of years. Naturally, they could tell what Luo Fan was doing with a single glance. However, their expressions changed slightly. Among them, the majority of the changes in their expressions were those of envy. Even the remaining small portion revealed a pained and regretful expression, because at this very moment, Luo Fan's actions were clearly using an extremely direct and violent method to absorb the essence of the 6 Absolutes Nebula. He was comprehending the part of the Grand Tao contained within the essence of the 6 Absolutes Nebula. Such a method was simple, direct, and fast. It was something that everyone was envious of. However, such a method would also cause irreversible damage to the essence of the 6 Absolutes Nebula. Using such a method, when Luo Fan completely comprehended the profundities of the Grand Tao contained within, it would also be the time when the essence of the 6 Absolutes Nebula completely dissipated. Naturally, Luo Fan didn't care about the changes in their expressions. At this very moment, he felt as if he had turned into a god of creation. All the profundities of the entire 6 Absolutes Nebula were displayed in his eyes at an unimaginable speed. It made him feel as if his understanding of the Grand Tao was rapidly improving at every moment. Even his cultivation realm was rising at an unimaginable speed during this process. Previously, when he used the crystal to sense the entire Six Absolutes Nebula, although he could also sense everything within the Six Absolutes Nebula, that feeling was completely different from what he was feeling right now. At that time, what he sensed was more of the surface situation, or rather, it was just the effect of the countless laws interacting with each other. It was also extremely profound. It greatly benefited him, allowing him to have a deeper understanding of the characteristics of the various laws. And at this very moment, what he felt, it was completely from the inside out, directly penetrating into the essence of the Six Absolutes Nebula. It directly penetrated into the grand Tao hidden behind the countless laws and laws. It directly spread out in front of him, unfolded, and turned into his own. The difference between the two, it was the difference between knowing how it is and knowing why it is. During this process, an endless stream of information flowed through his mind and mind. Then it was absorbed into the depths of his own memory. In a short span of half a day, the miniature version of the Six Absolutes Nebula with a radius of 100 feet had been completely absorbed by Luo Fan. It completely disappeared in front of everyone as if it had never appeared. At the moment when the miniature Six Absolutes Nebula disappeared, a muffled sound suddenly came from Luo Fan's body. These muffled sounds seemed as if there were hundreds of millions of thunderbolts raging wildly in his body. It also seemed as if there were thousands of worlds being opened up in his body in an instant. Along with this muffled sound, Luo Fan's aura wasn't suppressed in the slightest. His aura, which hadn't been revealed in the slightest, rapidly soared and directly soared into the sky, spreading in all directions. This aura was getting stronger and more terrifying. In the beginning, it only shocked the numerous innate golden immortal realm cultivators. Later on, it even caused all of them to feel as if they'd fallen into the toughest substance in the entire universe. Boundless pressure pressed down upon them and restricted them, causing them to feel as if even the slightest breath would exhaust their entire strength. They had to endure the pressure of this imposing aura at any moment and the danger of being crushed in a powder that poured down upon them like a torrential downpour. Did he break through? Such a thought appeared in everyone's mind. Luo Fan's performance was clearly the result of breaking through a tough shackle in his cultivation. It was an extremely shocking breakthrough, and it would only appear when he was temporarily unable to control the change in his aura. So, how could they not know what was happening to Luo Fan? Such a thought made their feelings unimaginably complicated. When they first met Luo Fan's cultivation was only below average among them. However, when they met for the second time after over 200,000 years, Luo Fan had already surpassed them. Of course, at that time, they were still able to sense that while Luo Fan was stronger than them, there wasn't much of a gap between them in terms of essence. In other words, Luo Fan was just a connate grand heavenly realm cultivator like them at that time. And after that, the process of breaking through was very difficult. Luo Fan improved at an unimaginable speed. In a short period of a few hundred years, he'd already allowed the essence of his life to attain transcendence, causing these connate golden immortal realm cultivators like them to be inferior to ants before him. Such speed, it was already sufficient to shock them to the point of being speechless. However, at this moment, Luo Fan had actually made a huge breakthrough on top of such a foundation. How unbelievable was this situation, and how earth-shattering was his cultivation speed. How could they accept it calmly? Right now, Luo Fan had indeed obtained a huge breakthrough, just as many connate grand heavenly realm cultivators thought. After completely absorbing the essence of the Six Absolute Nebula, the boundless information that Luo Fan obtained from the projection of the previous 3,333 eras surfaced once again. Along with the various mysteries he had just obtained, it created an indescribable force that pushed his cultivation realm to directly break through the barrier between the 8th and 9th level of the celestial realm, allowing his cultivation realm to instantly rise from the 8th level of the celestial realm to the 9th level of the celestial realm. Although the difference between the peak of the 8th level of the celestial realm and the 9th level of the celestial realm seemed insignificant. But the gap between the two was like a chasm. After breaking through this barrier, the power in his body instantly increased by 1,000 times, and it was endless. He had received it indirectly in the past, intentionally or unintentionally. However, he did not completely master it. The principles related to power were instantly absorbed by him, and they completely fused into his instincts. This in turn affected the power in his body, allowing the power in his body to take another step forward towards the source of power. This kind of improvement made his power even more mysterious. There were more wondrous uses, and it became easier and more exciting to use. The transformation into other powers also became smoother. Faintly, he could even sense some kind of boundless and mysterious power beyond the universe. How mysterious was that power? In Luo Fan's senses, that power only needed a strand the size of a strand of hair to be able to directly transform the entire boundless world. Just a small strand the size of a thumb would be able to directly transform into a universe that was no smaller than the universe on Earth. The moment he sensed that power, Luo Fan understood that this was the state of chaos. Or rather, it was the power of chaos in the world of power. This kind of feeling was faintly discernible, seemingly illusory yet real, seemingly existing yet not existing. There was no way to clearly sense it, and it was even more impossible to rely on such a feeling to comprehend this power. Even so, Luo Fan was indescribably overjoyed. He even felt inexplicably touched. This was the first time he had clearly understood a point of view in the world of power. Everything was composed of power, and even the state of chaos was composed of power. This meant that there was nothing wrong with the method he cultivated. This incarnation of his consciousness was indeed on the correct path to transcendence. Even in the past, he had been extremely confident about this and believed that the path he took would not be wrong. However, it was only now that he had concrete evidence to prove this point. Only now could he confidently declare this to any living being. The aura that filled the world on Luo Fan's body lasted for 15 minutes before gradually receding. When all of his aura was completely reseated, Luo Fan no longer looked any different from before. He was also like an ordinary person. It was impossible to tell that the terrifying aura from before came from his body, and it was impossible to tell that he was so powerful. He let out a long sigh of relief, and a happy smile appeared on his face. He raised his head and looked at the sky. His gaze pierced through space and time, as if he could see the entire world around him. His cultivation realm had risen to the 9th stage of celestial realm. Although he had just stepped into it, it also meant that his cultivation realm and the comprehension of the annihilation realm were one step closer. It meant that he could more easily comprehend the annihilation realm. It meant that he could break through the annihilation realm at a faster speed and reach the void comprehending realm. This naturally made him feel indescribably happy. "Congratulations on your great progress, Brother Luo," the martial emperor said with a rather complicated expression as he went up. The friendship between the martial emperor and Luo Fan could be said to be comparable to that of brothers. However, in the face of Luo Fan's huge breakthrough, he didn't know what to say. After all, the martial emperor had spent billions of years to reach his current cultivation realm, and the last time he improved was when he received Luo Fan's guidance and found his own path, the right direction to move forward. After that, even though he received a lot of care from Luo Fan, received a few dozen era projections information backlash, and obtained fortuitous encounters that other innate heavenly immortals did not have, his cultivation realm did not improve much. At most, he only strengthened his foundation. In comparison, Luo Fan advanced triumphantly. At the beginning, he was only slightly inferior to Luo Fan, but now, he could not even compare to an ant. Even though he had a special relationship with Luo Fan, he found it hard to accept such a speed of improvement. Even though it was not to the extent of jealousy or estrangement, he felt that it was difficult for him to face Luo Fan like before. Luo Fan's senses were so sharp that he knew what the martial emperor was thinking as soon as he spoke, and he could not help but sigh inwardly. Chapter 862. After sighing, Luo Fan said, "You're too kind, Brother Luo. I've obtained all the benefits from these 3,000 tests. Wouldn't I be like a piece of rotten wood if I didn't improve?" The martial emperor's expression remained unchanged when he heard Luo Fan, and a trace of understanding flashed through his eyes. He'd only obtained a few dozen era projections information backlash, yet he'd already obtained so many benefits that it shook his cultivation realm. Luo Fan had obtained over 3,000 era projections information backlash. Even though it was still too shocking, it wasn't incomprehensible after all. With this understanding, the martial emperor felt much better, even though he knew that the gap between him and Luo Fan was still extremely huge. Right at this moment, the voice of the bridge of the era that hadn't appeared for a long time after the numerous Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators stepped into this place and entered their ears. It interrupted the numerous Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators' thoughts of talking to Luo Fan. This is the 3,335th test, the Chaotic Starfield. The way to pass through this test is to destroy this starfield. Obviously, the Bridge of the Era's artifact spirit had been paying attention to everything that happened here since a long time ago. At this moment, when Luo Fan had completed his breakthrough, it finally spoke these words that the numerous Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators intended to say after they passed the 3,334th test. The reason for this was naturally because Luo Fan had the qualifications to make it accommodate him now. As a destroyer, even though Luo Fan was slightly weaker than the Bridge of the Era, he could be considered to be on the same level as the Bridge of the Era. However, he was countless times stronger than the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators in the eyes of the Bridge of the Era. So, it naturally treated him specially. The hearts of the numerous Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators jerked when they heard the voice of the Bridge of the Era, and boundless vigilance arose in their hearts. The Bridge of Eras had named the forbidden areas according to the names they had received at that time. Since this stage was called Chaotic Rebellion, it was clear that it was not that simple. The 6 absolute nebula from before had already made them suffer greatly. How could they underestimate a place that could be called chaos? The starfields of chaotic strife? Luo Fan thought to himself. He looked around and found himself surrounded by a boundless starry sky. It seemed to be in the same universe as Earth. If it wasn't for the treasure spirit's voice, people would have thought that this was a projection of an era. So that's how it is. Chaotic reversal, chaotic reversal. So it's about reversing time and chaotic space. Luo Fan was an annihilator. His cultivation level had improved greatly due to his previous breakthrough. He could use the true meaning of annihilation more perfectly. Although he only glanced around casually, he saw many things that other Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators couldn't see. He saw some of the profound principles hidden on the surface of the void. By now, many of the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators no longer had any doubts about Luo Fan's abilities. After hearing the treasure spirit's voice, most of them looked around but didn't see anything. They all turned their gazes to Luo Fan. Clearly, they were pinning their hopes on Luo Fan. Luo Fan's expression didn't change much, but all of the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators present were extremely observant. In the instant that Luo Fan came to a realization, they realized that Luo Fan had already learned something. At that moment, Old Man Omniscient stepped forward. I wonder if fellow Taoist Luo Fan knows anything about the chaotic starfields? We've learned nothing, so I hope you'll be generous enough to enlighten us, fellow Taoist. We'll be of help in destroying this starfield. The other Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators' expressions changed slightly, but most of them had the same thoughts as Old Man Omniscient. They immediately bowed to Luo Fan, asking for guidance. Even the arrogant Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators, those who hadn't placed all their hopes on Luo Fan, didn't leave in disdain. Instead, they stayed where they were, listening without any awkwardness. Luo Fan didn't take their differing attitudes to heart. After all, giving them some pointers would be of great help in destroying the chaotic starfields. He smiled. You're too courteous, fellow Taoists. I wouldn't dare say I know anything about the chaotic starfields. I only know what the word chaotic means. I believe the word chaotic refers to the reversal of time and chaos of space. Reversal of time and chaos of space? The expressions of the many Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators, including the martial monarchs, changed drastically when they heard Luo Fan's nonchalant words. Time and space were the most mysterious existences in the world. For ordinary cultivators, it was something that they could not understand or sense at all. Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators like them were much stronger than ordinary cultivators, and they could sense the existence of time and space, but they couldn't completely transcend them. They, too, existed between space and time. Under such circumstances, any change in time and space would have a huge impact on them. For example, the flow of time on the Bridge of Eras was tens of thousands of times slower than the outside world. That was a headache for many Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators, and they couldn't come up with a good solution even now. But at this very moment, this checkpoint before them was actually a checkpoint that reversed time and distorted space. What sort of vile situation was this? How could their faces not change as a result of this? Of course, the only one who looked slightly better was the spacewalker, the Void Maiden. After all, the spacewalker's abilities were related to time and space. She was an expert in the chaotic starfields. How should we deal with this? Old Man Tong Xiao asked, steeling himself. Even though he'd gained boundless knowledge and understood everything, this was the first time he'd ever come across a region that could reverse time and chaos of space. He didn't know how to deal with it. I'm ashamed. I didn't know. I'm no different from you, fellow Taoists. I don't know much about the chaotic starfields either. Luo Fan smiled bitterly. He wasn't lying. He'd only scanned his surroundings. It was already extremely rare for him to be able to glean some information about the chaotic starfields. There was no way he could know more, let alone how the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators should deal with it. He had his own way of dealing with it, but only he could use it. Obviously, it wasn't something they wanted to hear. Old Man Tong Xiao couldn't help but look disappointed when he heard Luo Fan's words. However, there was a flash of light in his eyes. He didn't get an answer from Luo Fan. However, it also made him understand that Luo Fan wasn't omniscient, and there was a limit to what he knew. He wouldn't be able to see through things that they couldn't comprehend even after spending thousands of years. This situation, although they couldn't get an answer on how to break through the barrier, it also boosted their confidence. They felt that the gap between them and Luo Fan wasn't so great that they couldn't make up for it. The other Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators had similar reactions. It was clear that they all had the same mentality. Luo Fan only smiled when he saw the change in their eyes. He didn't take it to heart. However, I believe this star field won't be too troublesome for you, fellow Taoists. With your abilities, I'm sure you'll be able to protect yourselves here. Even if you don't know where to start, you can search around like you would any other place. After all, this isn't the real chaotic starfields. It's just a projection. It doesn't matter where you're trapped. As long as you pass through the barrier, you'll return to where you started. Since everyone had already asked him, although he couldn't give them a direct answer, he had a suggestion. In truth, many Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators could think of such a suggestion. But when they heard what Luo Fan had said, they wanted to express their gratitude to Luo Fan. After that, they didn't say anything else and went their separate ways. The starfields of chaotic starfields were a strange place. Everyone was only a few hundred meters away, several thousand meters away, or even tens of thousands of miles away before they were swallowed up by the chaotic space and time. They disappeared from Luo Fan's sight. Among them was Emperor Wu. Although Emperor Wu and Luo Fan weren't friends, he was still a Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator with a strong will. He couldn't rely on Luo Fan for everything, but he didn't stay with Luo Fan to explore the starfields of chaotic starfields. After bidding farewell to Luo Fan, he left like the rest of the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators to explore the starfields of chaotic starfields on his own. Luo Fan sighed as he watched them leave. He turned around and took a step forward. He crossed a distance of several dozen meters and crashed into a nearby area where space and time were a little strange. Although he hadn't fully seen through the mysteries of the starfields of chaotic starfields, he was able to discern the nature of the place. Naturally, he was able to spot a location that was compatible with the nature of the starfields of chaotic starfields. This particular area of space and time was the closest thing he had seen to the nature of the starfields of chaotic starfields. As soon as he crashed into this area, he felt as if he had entered a ripple of space and time. Whether it was time or space, they existed in a way he'd never seen before. In a trance, he suddenly saw dozens of himself appear in front of him. It was as if dozens of mirrors had suddenly appeared in front of him. He was startled, and with a thought, an indescribable power of space and time emanated from his body. Like countless tentacles, they firmly grasped the changing space and time around him and held him in place. After he was secured, he discovered that the dozens of himself in front of him were real. There were no mirrors, and they weren't illusions. At this moment, the dozens of him were also looking at him with an extremely strange gaze. Their expressions, their eyes, were clearly the same as his own. They were astonished by his appearance and found it difficult to comprehend. This is me in a different time. In a trance, Luo Fan suddenly realized what kind of existence these people in front of him were. Just when he had this kind of enlightenment, he looked forward and discovered that the dozens of people in front of him also had expressions of enlightenment in their eyes. It was just that some of them had comprehended it rather quickly, while others had comprehended it rather slowly. But no matter how fast it was, they were able to comprehend it faster than Luo Fan. When he realized this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly to himself. It seems that they're all me in the future. They've clearly experienced this scene long ago, but they thought of this fact faster. As Luo Fan smiled bitterly to himself, the dozens of himself in front of him didn't say anything. They just turned around and took a step forward. They flashed through mysterious trajectories, broke through space and time, and instantly disappeared in front of Luo Fan. Clearly, they didn't need to do anything here anymore. He watched as dozens of himself in the future appeared out of thin air and then disappeared. Luo Fan suddenly felt an extremely complicated emotion. He seemed to feel that it was absurd, but also mysterious, and he couldn't react. After a long while, he smiled and shook his head, extinguishing these messy emotions, and began to pay attention to his surroundings. Time and space existed in an extremely strange way. This way of existence was completely different from the normal world. It was completely different from the normal world. In a normal world, time was continuous and sequential, and space was orderly and smooth. However, the time here was warped and broken. On the other hand, space was chaotic and fluctuating indeterminately. Such as space. It seemed to be extremely strange and chaotic. If Luo Fan hadn't taken time and space to be a type of energy to comprehend since a long time ago, and he'd even fused their nature into the energy within his body that was almost like the source of energy, then he would probably be utterly unable to maintain his freedom in such chaotic space. At this moment, it was impossible for him to maintain his autonomy in such a chaotic space-time. He could only drift in this strange space-time. It was difficult to keep his body unaffected, let alone comprehend the mysteries within. When he understood this, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel slight pity for the fates of the other golden, immortal realm cultivators. Even though they were able to protect themselves in such a strange space, they would probably experience all sorts of strange things that even exceeded the scope of understanding of living beings. Encountering numerous versions of himself like Luo Fan was probably only one of them that was the easiest to understand. After thinking for a moment, Luo Fan tossed these thoughts aside. He focused his attention on the abnormality of the surrounding space. In Luo Fan's opinion, time and space were just two different types of energy. At this moment, the abnormality of this space was to him. It was the abnormality of the structure of these two types of energy. The original structure of time and space was extremely stable, to the point that it couldn't be broken or broken. At this moment, the abnormality of this structure was both a trouble and an opportunity for him at the same time. An opportunity that allowed him to comprehend these two types of energy more deeply. An opportunity that allowed him to control time and space more perfectly, or in other words, it was an opportunity. Thinking of this, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a faint excitement in his mind. All distracting thoughts were completely eliminated by him, and he began to analyze the surrounding power of time and space with the help of various mysterious methods inherited from Tao Master Hercules. The abnormality of the structure of time and space was already a fact in front of him. But for Luo Fan, understanding this structure wasn't his goal. His goal was to understand the source of this abnormality. By studying this source, not only would he be able to comprehend the mysteries of time and space, but he would also be able to find the root of the star fields of upheaval. If he could find the root, then he would be able to find the core of the star fields of upheaval. Then he would be able to destroy it and pass the 3,335th trial. With this plan in mind, Luo Fan finally understood why he had encountered so many versions of himself. Finding the root of the chaos in one area wasn't enough. It was like determining the shape of a triangle required 3 points. To determine the shape of a quadrilateral required 4 points. To determine the root of the chaos in the star fields, it was impossible to start from this one area. You would have to search for the root of the chaos. You would have to search for dozens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of areas. Only then would you be able to find the root of the chaos. The dozens of versions of himself he had encountered were the same as the dozens of times he had entered the star fields of upheaval. Shaking his head, Luo Fan had a better idea of what he was about to accomplish. But he didn't feel any negative emotions. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even tens of millions of times to him were nothing. In any case, every time he found the source of chaos in a certain chaotic zone, it was a process of cultivation progress for him. Even if he had to find the root of the chaos in tens of millions of areas, it would only take him a few tens of millions of times. So what if it's nothing? Could it compare to spending trillions of years to solidify his cultivation foundation? Trouble? Difficulty? With a smile, Luo Fan entered into a state of deep enlightenment. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. He had finally grasped the root of the chaos in the star fields of upheaval. Hidden beneath the layers of space and time, hidden behind the boundless principles and protogenia, was the power that defined the star fields of upheaval. In the eyes of other cultivators, it wasn't much of a power. This chaotic energy was obviously a broken chaotic energy. It was just a strand of the complete chaotic energy. Although this chaos power was able to display the complete characteristics of the chaos power, it was extremely incomplete and one-sided. Even if one were to forcefully deduce it, there would definitely be a huge deviation in the final result. This proved Luo Fan right. He couldn't rely on just one area of upheaval to extrapolate the root of the chaos in the star fields of upheaval. He needed to find more and more of the chaos energy in the star fields of upheaval to weave together the complete version. Only then would he be able to find the root of the chaos. Chapter 863. For such a situation, Luo Fan had already expected it, so naturally, he was not discouraged. First written novel, fastest novel update. With a thought, he snapped out of his state of comprehending the source of the zone of chaos and slowly stood up. With a thought, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. His figure instantly streaked through the air in a mysterious trajectory. This trajectory was so complex and profound that it couldn't be described with words. It seemed to contain some sort of chaotic aura, but it was completely in line with the source of the zone of chaos. As he took a step forward, his figure instantly disappeared in an area of chaotic space-time. When he reappeared, he was back in the outside world, back where he and the other Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators had first stepped into the starfields of chaos. With a thought, he sensed the power of time around him. Luo Fan knew that although he'd spent 3 years in the zone of chaos, only a moment had passed in the outside world. From the outside world's point of view, or to be more precise, from where he stood, he just charged into the zone of chaos. An instant later, he'd stepped out of the zone of chaos with a look of satisfaction on his face. The entire process was mysterious beyond imagination. I see. When he realized this, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. He now had a deeper understanding of the star fields of chaos. It was important to know that the chaotic zone he had stayed in for 3 years had almost cycled. In other words, the past was the future, and the future was the past. No matter how long you stayed there, it was all internal. Compared to the outside world, it didn't exist. Of course, this didn't mean the zone of chaos was the best place to cultivate. Because besides Luo Fan, even Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators couldn't maintain their sense of self in the zone of chaos. They couldn't stabilize the space-time around them, and could only drift along with the changes in the zone of chaos. Even protecting oneself required almost all of one's concentration, let alone cultivating normally. Since it was so mysterious, Luo Fan felt even more at ease. After all, he needed to explore many more zones of chaos. If he had to spend more than 3 years on each one, then he would probably need hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years to truly find the source of the chaos and truly destroy this trial. After all, they were on the bridge of time, and the flow of time here was 10,000 times slower than the outside world. If he were to spend a few hundred years here, it would be equivalent to wasting millions of years. A few thousand years would be tens of millions of years. If it was calculated in terms of 10,000 years, it would be equivalent to hundreds of millions of years. Even Luo Fan would not be able to bear such a waste. At this time, such a change had completely eliminated Luo Fan's worries. Naturally, it made him feel at ease. This was the star fields of chaos, a place where space-time chaos was as numerous as the stars in the sky. If one wanted to find the region of space-time turbulence, one only needed to take a glance to see countless time and space anomalies existing in this seemingly boundless starry sky. Under such circumstances, it was rather easy for Luo Fan to find the other chaotic regions. With a sweep of his mind, he saw hundreds and thousands of them. Luo Fan did not hesitate. He stepped forward and randomly chose a region of space-time turbulence. In the blink of an eye, he found himself in a completely new space. This place was very similar to the region of space-time turbulence he had entered before. Even the feeling of stepping into this place was the same. Amidst the endless changes, Luo Fan's body released the power of time and space. They transformed into tentacles that held his body in place. No matter how the space-time around him changed, it could not affect his body. It could not move his body. As this happened, the world in his eyes changed again. The strange lights and shadows that had been constantly changing were now fixed in place. Luo Fan looked around. He did not find himself in a different time like last time. He knew that this region of space-time turbulence was different from the one he had entered before. Or rather, it was not connected. In such a situation, it was obvious that the source of the space-time turbulence here was very likely to be different from the power of chaos that he had previously understood. After understanding this, he did not waste any more time. He began the process that he had done before. He tried to understand the source of the space-time turbulence through the changes in the space-time and space. This process lasted for nearly 3 years before Luo Fan completed the entire process of comprehension. He found the source of the chaos in this chaotic zone. It was incomplete, very broken, and there were traces of chaotic energy. After adding the mysteries of the power of chaos to what he had comprehended before, the power of chaos became a little more complete. However, it was still very far from being complete and perfect. Obviously, he still had to continue to look for more places of space-time turbulence. With a slight thought, Luo Fan stepped out from the source of the space-time turbulence. He easily transcended the place of space-time turbulence and arrived in the starry sky outside. Similarly, the time in the outside world was still the instant after he had stepped into the space-time turbulence. The time and the space-time turbulence did not affect the outside world at all. Luo Fan had expected this, but he did not have any distracting thoughts. With a thought, he entered another region of space-time turbulence. After a moment, he emerged from that region. At this time, apart from the slight understanding in his eyes, he looked no different from before. Just like this, Luo Fan continuously entered one region of space-time turbulence after another. In just half a day, he had already repeated this process more than 300,000 times. This half a day was only half a day in the outside world. However, to Luo Fan, the time he had experienced was more than 1,000,000 years. The regions of space-time turbulence seemed to be scattered, but if the source of chaos in two different regions was the same, then no matter which region one stepped into, they would arrive at the same place. Among the 300,000 regions that Luo Fan had entered in half a day, close to 10% of them had the same source of chaos as the other regions. In other words, there were close to 30,000 times when he stepped into a region that he had entered before and saw another version of himself at a different time. Among them, there were dozens of times when he had stepped into the same region of space-time he had entered for the first time. Apart from these regions of space-time that he had entered before, in the other 300,000 regions of space-time turbulence, Luo Fan spent an average of 3 years to completely understand the source of chaos and find the power of chaos that had caused the space-time turbulence in these regions. Among them, some regions took a shorter time, only a few months, while others took 7 or 8 years. The pattern depended on how much of the source of chaos there was, but it wasn't determined by how quickly Luo Fan comprehended it. After spending such a long time, using so many different methods, and finally comprehending the 300,000 strands of chaos power, Luo Fan finally managed to reconstruct the power that had caused the entire star fields of chaos to descend into chaos. Although there were still traces of flaws and cracks within it, it was still possible to see through it. It wasn't complete, but overall, there was no longer any doubt in Luo Fan's mind. But what Luo Fan needed to do next was no longer to continue exploring the regions of space-time. Instead, he needed to start from the reconstructed power of chaos and gain a deeper understanding of it. The last strand of chaos he had comprehended had already formed the framework of the power of chaos. The flaws and cracks were insignificant compared to the entirety of the power of chaos. Starting from what he had learned before, he could make up for it. Naturally, he didn't need to continue studying the other regions of chaos. Even if he wanted to, it would be difficult. There were many chaotic zones in the star fields of chaos, but Luo Fan had a rough idea of their types. He had even spotted Sciention Grand Luo realm cultivators, including martial emperors. He was just looking for other chaotic zones. It would be difficult to find a region he hadn't entered before. Under these circumstances, rather than pinning his hopes on finding a new region of chaos, it was better to focus on perfecting the framework of chaos. With this realization in mind, Luo Fan looked around, examining the endless regions of chaos that littered the star fields of chaos. Before long, he found a region that wasn't as chaotic. He didn't need to expend too much energy to fix himself in place. With a thought, he lifted his foot and stepped into it. After he stepped into it, he'd already fixed the space and time around him with a thought, and then he raised his eyes to look over. He saw himself sitting cross-legged in space nearby, and his eyes seemed to be closed. Obviously, he was comprehending the profundities of this area. This was the version of him who had entered the 10,000th region of chaos to understand the source of chaos. Looking at himself from this point of view, Luo Fan suddenly felt an indescribable emotion wash over him. At this moment, in this region of chaos, the past, the present, and the future coexisted. For him, he, who was comprehending the chaotic zone not far away, was the past. For the past him, the present him, was the future. For the two of them, they were the present. The three of them coexisted in this world, and the cycle of reincarnation, the flow of time, and its mysteries were vividly and vividly displayed. In an instant, the memories of the past, the present, and the future resurfaced, without missing a single detail. All of these feelings intertwined with the one he was feeling now. In an instant, the past, the present, and the future merged into one. In a trance, he suddenly felt that the chaotic power, which was originally flawed and incomplete, suddenly became complete at an unimaginable speed. The imperfect power quickly disappeared, and the cracks were mended. Before long, it had completed the process that Luo Fan had expected to take hundreds of thousands of years to complete. The perfect power of chaos appeared in Luo Fan's mind. Luo Fan was finally able to understand the source of chaos in the starfield of chaos. When the power of chaos became complete, the region of chaos before him was no longer a mystery to him. In fact, he could even sense the starry sky outside the chaotic zone. The circulation of the various laws, the mysteries of the great Tao hidden behind them, and the chaotic power that caused time to reverse in space to become chaotic in the starry domain were all revealed to him without any concealment. So that's how it is. Luo Fan's face lit up with understanding. With a thought, he took a step forward and his figure was already out of the chaotic zone. This speed was many times faster than the speed he had experienced in the region of chaos. It was almost as if he had accidentally entered the region of chaos before. It was no wonder that he hadn't noticed anything strange about his other self in the region of chaos. When he arrived in the outside world, Luo Fan didn't hesitate. His way of walking was extremely mysterious and complicated. He didn't move in a straight line, nor did he go around the regions of chaos. Instead, it was as if he was specifically looking for the regions of chaos to enter. But when he entered the regions of chaos, he was no longer in his original location. He was now in a different region of chaos. He had traversed a vast expanse of space. He moved forward in such a reckless manner. In less than half a day, Luo Fan had already traversed the void that was dozens of light years away and arrived at a strange location. This place didn't look any different from any other place. It was also filled with countless chaotic regions. Moreover, the density of the chaotic regions was not any different from other places. However, Luo Fan knew that in this place, this was the source of the chaotic energy. The source of the chaotic starfield was in this region, hidden within one of the regions of chaos. After absorbing the past, present, and future, the three mysteries of chaos, into one body, Luo Fan's perception of the chaotic energy had reached a point where it couldn't be hidden. All he could see was the power of the starfields of chaotic strife. It was like a boundless ocean blotting out the sky and covering the earth. Within this ocean of chaotic energy, there was a giant vortex. It was connected to one of the regions of chaos. If Luo Fan didn't know where the core of the chaotic energy was, then wouldn't he have wasted his time in the perishment stage? He smiled faintly. Luo Fan took a step forward and stepped into the chaotic region that overlapped with the ocean whirlpool of chaotic force. As soon as he stepped into it, the surrounding light and shadows changed. In an instant, it seemed as if countless living beings flashed before him, and there were even countless images of him. It was as if he'd been here countless times, or as if he'd been here for countless years. Among the images, it wasn't just him, but the 20 or so Khanate Grand Luo cultivators, including Emperor Wu. He could even see how the Khanate Grand Luo cultivators struggled, and how the changes in space and time had an indescribable effect on them. With a thought, Luo Fan transformed the power within him into the power of time and space. It transformed into a giant tentacle that locked down the space and time around him, barely keeping him in place. But this time, the power of time and space he had to expend was 1,000 times more than what he'd expended in other regions of chaos. Moreover, even after he'd stabilized his body, the area he could affect was only a few dozen feet around him. Beyond that area, time and space were still constantly changing, and there were still countless flashes of light and shadows. Everything was the same as before. If there was a difference, it was that the speed of the changes was much faster. It was as if the entire starfield of chaotic strife's chaotic energy was crushing down on him. It was as if all of the chaotic energy in the starfield of chaotic strife was crushing down on him. It was trying to assimilate him into the chaotic energy. Luo Fan hovered there, his expression indifferent. He hadn't expected this to happen, but he'd expected most of it. Naturally, he wasn't fazed. The chaotic force was a mysterious force. It contained a kind of mixed supreme divine might that even surpassed time and space. Even if it was just a trace of this power, its might would be boundless. It would be enough to cause living beings to be at a loss for what to do, and even cause them to perish. What's more, the chaotic energy that blotted out the sky and covered the earth was like an ocean. Although Luo Fan was already a destroyer and had completely comprehended the mysteries of the chaotic force, even if he converted all of his power into the chaotic force, compared to the ocean of chaotic force, it was still like a drop in the ocean. It was simply insignificant. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan did not use the chaos force to change this chaotic region. Instead, he used the power of time and space, which could be used by the chaos force, to stabilize his existence. After all, the chaotic power was the source of the chaotic zone. It required divine might that could change the entire sea of chaotic power. As for the time force and space force, they only needed to be constantly replenished to resist the chaotic power's influence on them, and they would be able to maintain their existence. Luo Fan carefully examined the countless changes in the light around him. He carefully sensed the changes in the chaotic energy around him. With a single thought, he took a step in a certain direction. Every step he took required him to withstand the repulsive force of the chaotic energy. Every step required a great deal of energy. However, with every step he took, he would be a step closer to the source of the chaotic energy. The reason for that was because the direction he was heading in was the direction where the changes in the light were the most intense. The more intense the changes in the light, the stronger the effect of the chaotic power was. Naturally, he would be closer to the source of the chaotic power. To be continued. Chapter 864. Just as Luo Fan was approaching the core, thousands of lights and shadows suddenly fused together amidst the ever-changing lights and shadows around Luo Fan. After that, a connate golden immortal realm cultivator materialized, and he actually broke away from the boundless light in the blink of an eye. He arrived by Luo Fan's side and stepped into the space and time that Luo Fan had fixed. This connate true Luo was one of the rare females amongst the 20-odd connate true Luo cultivators. She was the spacewalker, the Empyrean. Luo Fan's heart moved, and he stopped moving forward. The space and time he'd fixed around him was his domain. If he didn't want to, he could repel the Empyrean the moment she stepped through the air and return her to the ever-changing light and shadows. But he didn't think of doing that. The Empyrean's presence wouldn't affect him in the slightest. It wouldn't cost him too much energy. Moreover, he was astonished that the Empyrean could emerge from the light and shadows. This was the source of all the chaos in the starfields. What they saw was a projection of the starfields of upheaval, and what they saw was an image of the starfields of upheaval. Perhaps it had a mysterious connection to the real regions of strife, but it wasn't the regions of strife. Even Luo Fan, who'd fully comprehended the power of the starfields of strife, couldn't materialize himself from the light and shadows and traverse space and time to appear here. However, the air hostess in front of him seemed to be able to do it rather easily. How could Luo Fan not be interested? Thank you, Taoist Luo. The Empyrean was cold and distant, but it was Luo Fan who'd protected her. She couldn't remain silent. She bowed respectfully to Luo Fan. Taoist Luo Fan's powers are amazing. How did you manage to get here? Luo Fan smiled. Nothing much. It's nothing much. Because of my special ability, the world I see is completely different from ordinary living beings. Time and space are not in the normal order. Instead, it was presented in a completely unfolded manner. The starfields of chaotic strife are strange, but I am able to restrain them. That is why I am able to locate you. Only then was I able to find the path that led to you, fellow Taoist. Fortunately, fellow Taoist didn't abandon me. Otherwise, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to escape. The Sky Maiden didn't dare to be negligent and explained in detail. I see. Luo Fan suddenly understood. Time and space within the starfields of chaotic strife was a strange and unimaginable place. But no matter what, it was still limited to time and space. Under such circumstances, it was not much different from ordinary space to the Void Lady, who could sense time and space in a different manner. The reason why she couldn't find the core of the starfields and had to wait for him to arrive was because her cultivation was far too low. She could sense the core of the starfields, but she couldn't do so because she couldn't see the core of the starfields. She couldn't find the crux of the starfields of chaotic strife, and couldn't escape the influence of time and space. She couldn't come here on her own. Is fellow Taoist Empty Girl's special ability innate? Luo Fan's mind stirred. He asked. He knew about the Sky Maiden's special ability, but he didn't think much of it. He was confident that no matter what it was, it couldn't compare to the power he gained after becoming an exterminator. However, at this moment, after personally experiencing the wonders of Air Hostess's ability, he could not help but be interested, and he had the thought of learning this ability. This ability is indeed something that I was born with. The Space Maiden smiled and said. The Sky Maiden was inexplicably beautiful, but her face was calm, almost cold. She had an unapproachable aura, causing people to involuntarily neglect her beauty. At this moment, she suddenly smiled sweetly. Her beauty was no longer concealed, and for a moment, the surrounding space and time became a lot brighter. Of course, Luo Fan didn't notice this at all. It couldn't cause any ripples in his mind at all. Born with it, Luo Fan's eyes lit up. An innate ability was something that a living being had when it was born. It could either come from its physical body or from its spirit. But no matter where it came from, it would have an innate ability that was different from other living beings. This meant that the power that formed this living being was different from other living beings. It could be that they had brand new powers that other living beings didn't have, or that their powers were constructed in a different way from other living beings. To Luo Fan, who cultivated the Tao of power inherited from the great strength Tao Lord, all of these were extremely useful and beneficial to his cultivation. In comparison, if the ability wasn't born with it, but obtained through some kind of cultivation method, it wouldn't be as valuable to Luo Fan. That was because there was a limit to cultivation methods. Only cultivators whose Daos were compatible with the cultivation method could cultivate the same cultivation method to the peak. If the Sky Maiden had obtained this ability through some kind of cultivation method, then it was obvious that only the Sky Maiden herself could cultivate that cultivation method to its peak. Even Luo Fan, who had entered the Parish Realm, would probably have to modify that cultivation method countless times to make it suitable for him to cultivate. In the end, he would only gain another ability, and it wouldn't be of much use to his own cultivation. With such considerations, Luo Fan immediately smiled and said, I'm rather interested in your ability. I wonder if you can allow me to examine it? The Sky Maiden's expression changed slightly when she heard what Luo Fan said. It was true that the Sky Maiden was an innate golden immortal, and it was also true that she had experienced a few billion years since she started cultivating until now. However, she was a woman no matter what. Even if she was an innate golden immortal and had experienced a few billion years, it was impossible to completely change the remnants of her mentality as a woman. Yet at this very moment, Luo Fan actually told her that he was interested in her ability and wanted to examine her body. It was easy to imagine how shocking it was to her. The Sky Maiden's first reaction was to refuse Luo Fan's abrupt request. However, she quickly came to her senses and could not help but feel some hope. Her ability to view time and space as flat was something she had possessed since she was born. Over the past few billion years, she had used countless methods to develop this ability. She had constantly improved the ability's power, but she had already reached her limit at this point. If she wanted to improve further, she would have to suddenly obtain great inspiration, or she would have to obtain a shocking increase in her cultivation. Clearly, these two methods were like flowers in the mirror or the moon in the water for her at this moment. It was impossible for her to rely on them. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan, who was countless times more powerful than her and even more powerful than all the cultivators she had met, had suddenly mentioned that he was interested in her ability. Wanting to study, it was simply an enormous, fortuitous encounter for the Sky Maiden, and it was a superb opportunity for her to break through the bottleneck of her ability. With that thought, even though she still felt a little awkward and even a little shy, she still nodded slowly and said, "Fellow Luo Fan, if you want to study my ability, you should be able to do so." Naturally, there was no problem. However, my ability has been stagnant for hundreds of millions of years. If fellow Taoist gains anything from your research, I hope you won't be stingy with your guidance. Luo Fan did not pay much attention to the change in the air hostess's mentality. He had been cultivating for trillions of years, and the difference between men and women in the mortal world was as far away as thousands of years ago to him. Even though the Empyrean before him was a woman, he didn't differentiate her consciousness, and he merely took her to be an ordinary golden immortal realm cultivator. It was also because of this mentality that he was so straightforward when he said that he wanted to check her body. But if he had the slightest idea that men and women were different, he would never have said such a thing. However, he cannot be blamed for this. For Luo Fan, who had created millions of worlds and billions of times more living beings, the body of a woman was no secret to him at all. The female body was no secret to him. He could even casually create it, so why would he care too much about it? He was rather delighted when he heard the Empyrean agree, and he said with a smile, "Of course. Since I've studied your body, I naturally have to tell you." The Empyrean was relieved when she heard that. She slowly dispersed the golden immortal realm power that coiled around her, and she revealed herself to Luo Fan without holding back. Facing such an Empyrean, Luo Fan naturally would not be courteous at all. With a thought, his perception instantly enveloped the entire body of the Empyrean. Perception was a more meticulous method of observation than the eyes. Perception could sense what the eyes could see, and most of what the eyes could not see could be sensed by perception. At this moment, as the Empyrean presented her body to Luo Fan without any defense, Luo Fan used his perception to sense the Empyrean's body. The Empyrean's clothes did not have any concealment effect at all. In Luo Fan's perception, the Empyrean was completely naked. Her body was naturally countless times more beautiful than an ordinary woman's. However, no matter how beautiful it was, she was still a woman, and it could not arouse any of his emotions. To Luo Fan, it was just an ordinary body. However, when his perception that seemed material swept past, the Empyrean only felt as if her entire body was being caressed by a large hand, and she could not help but tremble. Fortunately, she was also in golden immortal realm cultivator, and her control over her body was extremely strong and perfect. As a result, even though her emotions were shaken, it did not leak out at all. Luo Fan did not sense any changes in her at all. However, in her eyes, there was a rare shyness that had not appeared for countless years. There was no trace of the indifference that she had before, which was close to indifference. Luo Fan naturally did not care about what the Empyrean was feeling. At this moment, he was completely focused on the Empyrean. After his perception swept past her body, it seeped into her acupoints and instantly grasped everything inside and outside of her body. The Empyrean also cultivated the path of a golden core. However, she focused on space-time in her path of golden core. The golden immortal realm in her body contained all sorts of mysteries of space-time. It seemed illusory yet real, and it even seemed to be able to jump through the river of time and travel to the past and the future. As soon as he saw this power, Luo Fan knew that it was definitely the path of cultivation that the Empyrean had comprehended based on her innate abilities and the path of a golden core. Although it was not as powerful as the martial arts of a martial emperor, it unintentionally possessed some characteristics of a Tao of self. The reason why it was unintentionally was because the Empyrean herself did not realize that she wanted to open up her Tao of self at all. Instead, She treated the path of a golden core as the only path of cultivation that she could take for granted. The characteristics of a Tao of self did not come from her heart. Instead, it came from her innate abilities and divine abilities. Although Luo Fan felt that it was a pity, he did not intend to expose her. Although the Empyrean had agreed to let him examine her body, he had understood her innate abilities. However, he had also promised to pass on what he had learned to her once he understood the key points. Seriously speaking, it was just a transaction. Their relationship had not reached the level of his relationship with a martial emperor, so it was naturally impossible for him to reveal the key points of a Tao to her. After carefully comprehending the Empyrean's body and even delving into the depths of her body, Luo Fan discovered that this innate ability did not come from her body. It came from her spirit, from the source of her life. With a thought, he did not hesitate. His perception flowed through her body and into the mud pill palace between her eyebrows. Then, following the mud pill palace, he entered the world of her knowledge. In the world of the Empyrean's knowledge, there was a world that was beyond Luo Fan's imagination. The structure of this world was extremely strange. It was not like any world that could exist in the real world. It was not like any world that could exist in Luo Fan's knowledge. It was like any world that could exist in the real world. This world of the Empyrean's knowledge contained endless space and time. This endless space and time existed in a very strange way. It was a way that Luo Fan had never seen before. It was even stranger than the existence of the chaotic starfields. It was even more unbelievable. In this world of the Empyrean's knowledge, the endless space and time were distorted by the rules of the origin. It was laid out in a flat plane. The past, the present, and the future were all laid bare in front of him. Even a commoner without any special abilities could easily see all of this. He knew that this was how the past, the present, and the future all existed at the same time. As for the space, it was even more boundless. All of the space was directly presented in front of him. In this way, to Luo Fan, it was strange and strange. But to a commoner, it was like the endless space and time were stacked on top of each other. It was impossible to separate them. In this situation, the past, the present, and the future were intertwined. It was easy to imagine how strange and unbelievable the world was. This must be the world that the Empyreans saw. It is indeed very mysterious. It's very different from the perspective of the perishment realm. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. He was glad that he had made the right decision. This kind of perspective was a great supplement to the perspective of the realm of perishment. Evidently, even if the power he found wasn't of much help to his path of strength, just the insight he gained from this perspective was worth the price of the ticket. Although this space and time was unimaginably strange, as long as it was presented to him, Luo Fan could quickly grasp the source of its mysteries and easily distinguish the real from the fake. Soon, he found the location of the Empyrean's spirit hidden in the endless space and time. With a single step, he traversed the endless space and time in an instant. He arrived at the center of the Empyrean's knowledge. He stood in the middle of the seemingly real and illusory ball of light that seemed to contain the entire river of time and space. It was a ball of light that exuded endless vitality and contained endless mysteries. This was the Empyrean's spirit. Within it was the Empyrean's life essence. Not all spirits existed in the form of born ways bodies. The Empyrean's spirit clearly did not have the appearance of a born ways body. Instead, it was like the origin of time. The spirit was just flowing naturally at the moment. There was not a single thought, as if the Empyrean's consciousness did not exist within it. It was just a simple origin of time. Luo Fan's direct goal for coming here was to find the source of that power in the origin of life. He was only one step away, so he naturally did not hesitate. With a thought, his perception directly cut into this ball of divine soul. The moment his senses entered, the strands of the Empyrean's memories attacked him. Although Luo Fan did not treat the Empyrean as a woman different from other Khanate Zenith Heaven cultivators, he was not completely unconcerned. With a thought, layers of barriers formed around his senses, blocking the Empyrean's memories. The memories could only crash against the barriers, but they could not invade his senses, much less be sensed by him. The Empyrean had actually been observing Luo Fan's actions. When she saw this, she could not help but sigh in relief. Chapter 865. Luo Fan was a destroyer. What he sensed was much deeper than what the Air Maiden, who was an innate golden immortal, could sense. Words first appeared. The Air Maiden's soul was in this place, but when Luo Fan's senses swept past it, he was able to easily surpass the Air Maiden with his understanding of the soul. In just a short while, he had already pushed his understanding to a level that the Air Maiden could not compare to. This situation might seem absurd, but it was not. The Air Maiden's epiphany towards her own soul was like a blind man touching an elephant. She might be able to sense it clearly, but it was limited by her realm and the limits of her senses. Even if she spent a long period of time, what she obtained might not be the true appearance of the soul. But it was different for Luo Fan. Luo Fan was a destroyer, and the limits of his senses were much greater than the Air Maiden's. What he sensed was like a person with eyes. He could see the entire appearance of the elephant, and what he obtained was naturally much clearer than the Air Maiden, who had spent countless years studying it. I see. As expected, it's a power I've never seen before. At the instant his understanding towards the origin of life surpassed the Air Maiden's, Luo Fan grasped the source of the Air Maiden's innate ability, and he learned what caused the world she sensed to possess such profound mysteries. With a single thought, his senses locked down on the traces of that power, and he isolated himself from everything else, including the other senses he had toward the Air Maiden's soul. It was at this moment that the air hostess suddenly felt a strange warmth in the depths of her divine soul. It was as if she was suddenly enveloped by a great existence that could not be described with words. A warm, safe, and comfortable feeling enveloped her, and she could not help but have a baffled expression appear on her face. I didn't expect that fellow Taoist Luo Fan would have already found the crux so quickly. A thought suddenly flashed through the Space Maiden's mind, and there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. The various sensations just now had allowed her to understand that an incredibly important existence in her soul had been enveloped by a vast sense, and it had already become the target of Luo Fan's inspection of her body. There was no need to guess. That was definitely the key to his ability. Otherwise, Luo Fan would definitely not focus all of his perception on that spot. At this time, Luo Fan was wholeheartedly paying attention to the trace of power that he had grasped, carefully sensing the mystery of this power. This was a force. It was a power that Luo Fan had never seen before, but it was faintly similar to time power and spatial power to a certain extent. This power was indescribably exquisite. It contained infinite principles and extremely profound mysteries of space and time. As his understanding of this power deepened, a faint understanding gradually emerged in Luo Fan's mind. This understanding even affected the power in his body. It caused the power in his body to undergo an extremely subtle and profound change. That change couldn't be described with words. It seemed as if it existed, as if it didn't exist, as if it was an illusion, and as if it was reality. It was extremely mysterious and unpredictable. This process continued, and in the blink of an eye, 1,000 years had passed. That power was a completely new kind of power. Luo Fan had never seen this power before, and this power had completely merged with the Air Maiden's body. It was a combination of all the mysterious powers she had cultivated over the past billions of years. The mysterious powers were mixed together, and they were inseparable. It was difficult to separate them. Therefore, for Luo Fan to comprehend this vast power was extremely difficult. At least, it was hundreds of times more difficult than when he had tried to comprehend the powers of other living beings. It was also because of this that he had spent 1,000 years to barely complete this comprehension process. Fortunately, the place he and the Air Maiden were in was the most chaotic place in the starfields of chaos. Time here was isolated from the outside world and did not interfere with each other. Although it had been 1,000 years, to the outside world, it was only a moment. It did not take up the time he had wasted in the starfields of chaos. 1,000 years. For Luo Fan, it was a process of wholeheartedly paying attention to the mysteries of the power that existed within the Air Maiden's life essence. But for the Air Maiden, that was not the case at all. For the Air Maiden, during these 1,000 years, she was completely immersed in warmth, safety, and comfort. Luo Fan's exploration of the power, his study of it, was like a pair of hands caressing her soul, an embrace embracing her. That wonderful feeling had long ago intoxicated her, and she found it difficult to extricate herself. Even a connate Duo cultivator with a strong will could not remain unmoved by this feeling, which had lingered in the depths of her heart for 1,000 years. On this day, Luo Fan laughed heartily. He withdrew his senses and left the Air Maiden's body. At the same time, the power in his body circulated slightly and turned into a mysterious power. It was different from time and space, but it contained the nature of time and space power. It flowed endlessly within his body. Under the influence of this power, Luo Fan's vision of the world began to change. Another mysterious existence was added to the scene that the destroyer saw. The past, the present, and the future were laid out in front of him, and the infinite space was overlaid in front of him. However, they were separated in an extremely mysterious way, so that he would not be confused at all. What he saw wasn't just limited to the area of space-time disruption. It encompassed the entire starfields of chaos, spanning hundreds of thousands of light years. Hundreds of thousands of light years wasn't the limit of this power. Or rather, it wasn't Luo Fan's limit. The reason it was only a few 100,000 light years was because the starfields of upheaval only spanned a few 100,000 light years. The situation at this moment was clearly when Luo Fan changed the power in his body into the power that fused with Space Maiden's life origin. Naturally, he obtained Space Maiden's mysterious ability and a special perspective that allowed him to interpret time and space in another way. Space-time, in Luo Fan's eyes, was just power. From this perspective, one could interpret time and space in a different way, which was equivalent to viewing the power of time and space from a different perspective and distorting the manifestations of these two powers in a different way. Clearly, this was a great supplement to the perspective of those in the perishment realm. As he carefully savored the perspective of this power, an inexplicable feeling welled up in his heart. It was something he'd gained after breaking through to the 8th stage of celestial realm. The majestic power that encompassed the entire Earth's cosmos was now much clearer. He even felt like he was beginning to grasp some of that power's wondrous nature. To think there would be such a place. What a pleasant surprise. Luo Fan was overjoyed when he sensed the nature of that power. The Herculean Tao sovereign's worldview. They viewed everything as being made up of power. Even the state of chaos was no exception. It was all power. He could faintly sense the vast power that encompassed the entire Earth's cosmos. That was the state of chaos. At the moment, he could sense the nature of that power, which meant that he could sense the nature of the state of chaos. It was a monumental improvement. It was as if a tightly shut door had been pushed open a tiny gap. This was compared to the situation where the door was completely shut. Compared to the situation where he could not find a place to attack, it was thousands of times better. The nature of the state of chaos was nothing else. It resonated with the power that Luo Fan had obtained and fused with Space Maiden's life source. That power was not time energy, nor was it spatial energy. However, it possessed the various characteristics of both. In a certain aspect, it could be seen as a power that was similar to space-time power. In the state of chaos, time power, the power of space and countless other powers were mixed together in an extremely strange way and could not be separated. The mixing and inseparability of the two clearly had a certain degree of compatibility. It was this compatibility that caused the two to resonate. This allowed Luo Fan, who had circulated that power around his body, to interpret the state of chaos from a certain perspective. That was why the current situation had occurred. As he carefully sensed the tip of the iceberg of the power that was revealed from a boundless high place, Luo Fan's consciousness suddenly rose infinitely. All sorts of inexplicable feelings were born in his heart. The world in his eyes was constantly changing as he comprehended it. In the perspective brought by the state of perishing, the boundless rules and rules kept fading in the change. Or rather, it could be said that they kept getting rid of the appearance of the changes as they delved deep into the source of the rules and rules. Due to this change, the world in Luo Fan's eyes was rapidly approaching nothingness. After an unknown period of time, only then did Luo Fan return to his senses from the comprehension. His aura trembled, and a sliver of his aura could not be suppressed. It directly created an intense space-time storm in the chaotic region, causing the changing light and shadows around him to change even more violently. Although the sliver of aura was extremely small, its essence was supreme. Just a sliver of it was enough to make Space Maidens will feel an almost unbearable impact. If it were not for the fact that her life source had been enveloped by Luo Fan's senses for 1,000 years, which allowed her to adapt to Luo Fan's aura even more strongly. Just a sliver of his aura might have been enough to plant an indelible shadow in her mind and cause irreparable damage to her future cultivation. Taoist Luo Fan has actually become stronger again. At this moment, Space Maiden, who was feeling complicated, suddenly reacted. Her heart was filled with indescribable shock. The scene of Luo Fan breaking through the 8th stage of the immortal realm to the 9th stage of the immortal realm was still vivid in her mind. The vast and earth-shattering aura that was revealed at that time was still lingering in her memory. Space Maiden couldn't be clearer about the aura at that time. At this moment, although the sliver of aura that Luo Fan had revealed was extremely small, its essence was much stronger than the aura that she had sensed before. Given this situation, how could she not know that Luo Fan had made new progress and made a new breakthrough? After understanding that Luo Fan had made a breakthrough, Space Maiden could not help but look at Luo Fan with a complicated gaze. Previously, her life source had been enveloped by Space Maiden's senses for 1,000 years. The impact on Space Maiden had far exceeded Luo Fan's imagination. Even if a Khanate Zenith Heaven cultivator was hugged by a man for 1,000 years, she would definitely feel something for this man. Moreover, using her senses to envelop her life source was a more intimate method than hugging or even dual cultivation. With such 1,000 years of time, how could Space Maiden still treat Luo Fan as an ordinary fellow cultivator? She had already developed various thoughts about him that did not belong to the same cultivator. When she looked at Luo Fan, she felt that he was especially different from others, and some extremely subtle feelings arose in her. That kind of feeling naturally could not be love. For cultivators who had obtained immortality, something like love was definitely not something that could be easily produced. Even if she had already enjoyed such a comfortable feeling that was stronger than hugging, Space Maiden would definitely not fall in love with Luo Fan just because of this. Even if it was not love, such feelings were definitely not ordinary. At this moment, this feeling was suppressed by Luo Fan's aura, but it became deeper. It became even hotter, and it was even faintly transforming into another kind of emotion. At the same time, an inexplicable hope was also born in her heart. Over the years, what Luo Fan had been doing was none other than studying her body, studying her innate ability. He had studied her innate ability. At this moment, he had made such a breakthrough, and it was obvious that he had obtained it from this research. This meant that he must have made great progress in the research of that ability. As Space Maiden's heart was in turmoil, her expression became slightly dazed. At this moment, Luo Fan naturally did not care about Space Maiden's expression. At this moment, he was wholeheartedly paying attention to the changes within his body. The various comprehensions that he had gained previously were unimaginably beneficial to him. At this moment, he could even faintly see the existence of the void comprehending state. Although it was still rather far away, he already had a certain direction. With a feasible path to reach that state, he would no longer have to fumble in the dark like before. Other than the improvement in the state, The power in his body that was like the source of power had been refined countless times. That power had become even purer and purer, and the characteristics of the countless powers within it had fused even more perfectly. Even his cultivation level that had just reached the 9th rank of the celestial realm had completely stabilized during this process. There was not a trace of faintness anymore, and it was as if he had been immersed in the 9th rank of the celestial realm for countless years. After carefully sensing the various changes in his body for a long time, Luo Fan let out a long breath. A faint smile appeared on his face. When he opened his eyes, he noticed that Space Maiden seemed to be in a daze. It seemed like her emotions were extremely chaotic, and she could not control herself. When a connate, golden immortal realm cultivator suddenly revealed such an expression, it caused Luo Fan to frown, yet he didn't say anything. He just watched silently. Fortunately, even though Space Maiden's emotions were chaotic, she did not completely lose her senses to the outside world. After a few breaths of time, when Luo Fan looked at her, she had already returned to her senses. She blinked and noticed the situation before her, and she could not help but reveal slight embarrassment in her eyes. However, her expression had returned to its calm and tranquil state. It was a display of his extraordinary control over his own body. "Fellow Taoist, you seem to have gained a great deal. May I know what you have to teach me?" She barely managed to calm herself down and spoke indifferently. Even though Luo Fan knew that Space Maiden's mind was definitely restless at this moment and had many distracting thoughts, he did not think about it at all. When he heard Space Maiden's words, he just smiled and said, "You have gained quite a bit. Fellow Taoist's ability comes from a special power. This power contains the characteristics of time and space, and it possesses various profound abilities. If you are willing, I can create a technique for you to sense that power." Even though Space Maiden's emotions were chaotic, she was still overjoyed when she heard that. She could no longer maintain her previous indifference and said eagerly, "Fellow Taoist, please teach me." Luo Fan had already completely comprehended the characteristics of that power in the past 1,000 years. He wanted to create a method that Sky Maiden could cultivate, sense that power, circulate that power, and increase that power. However, it was only a matter of a thought. It did not require much time at all. Because of this, Luo Fan could casually say that he wanted to create a technique to give to the Space Maiden. Luo Fan did not hesitate when he saw that the empty lady was in such a hurry. A thought passed through his mind, and a countless number of complicated and mysterious characters and symbols rotated within his mind. He had a relatively complete grasp of the Sky Maiden's cultivation path from the previous round of sensing. At this moment, it was naturally not difficult for him to create a cultivation method that the Sky Maiden could cultivate. With a slight thought, the cultivation method appeared in his mind in an endless stream. Before long, it had become an extremely complete technique that was completely compatible with Space Maiden's original path of cultivation. After the technique was completely formed, Luo Fan could not be bothered to give it a name. He raised his hand and pointed. The technique turned into a ray of light that flew out of his finger and floated towards Space Maiden. The ray of light was extremely profound, as if it was solid. There seemed to be endless profound words flowing endlessly within it. According to Luo Fan, Space Maiden should have collected the ray of light and used some sort of technique to analyze it and extract the information it contained. However, she did not expect that the Space Maiden would raise her finger without hesitation when she saw the spiritual light. The spiritual light rushed into the mud pill palace between her eyebrows and rushed into her sea of consciousness through the mud pill palace. It directly integrated into her divine soul and almost completely integrated into the depths of her memory. She did it so straightforwardly. She did not seem to be wary of Luo Fan at all, as she imprinted the ray of light into the depths of her memory. If Luo Fan had done anything to the ray of light, Space Maiden would have suffered a great loss. If she did not have extreme trust in Luo Fan, she would not have made such a choice. Her extreme trust made Luo Fan a little confused for a while. To be continued. Chapter 866. The air hostess's actions were clearly subconscious. It was the side effect of having endured Luo Fan's senses for 1,000 years when he sensed her life source without holding anything back. Text first published, Baidu search. Reading novels fastest updated. Due to the inexplicable feeling she had for Luo Fan, the air hostess instinctively wanted to get close to Luo Fan. Her first reaction was to trust Luo Fan. She did not think that Luo Fan would harm her. In this state of mind, she had no time to react to the spiritual light emitted by Luo Fan. She directly followed her instincts, and without considering anything else, she directly guided it into the world of her sea of consciousness, directly integrating it into her soul and then into her memory. Luo Fan looked at the air hostess. Although he was curious as to why she would do that, he could not say anything. He just waited quietly. The air hostess absorbed the spiritual light into her spirit and fused the information it contained into her memories. Then, she suddenly felt an extremely mysterious method appear in the depths of her memories out of nowhere. All of her attention had been focused on the cultivation method. She did not have the time to think about the mistakes she had made before. Although the cultivation method had been casually created by Luo Fan was in the annihilation realm, and he had a thorough understanding of the power in the air hostess life source. The cultivation method was so exquisite that the air hostess was amazed. In her eyes, this cultivation method was perfect to the extreme. There were no flaws at all. Every word, every rune, every structure of the words, and every picture had reached an unchangeable perfection. The air hostess could only sigh and admire the cultivation method as she looked at it. The air hostess suddenly blushed slightly as she savored the cultivation method. She realized that the cultivation method was perfectly compatible with the one she had cultivated for billions of years. It was obvious that the person who had created the cultivation method was extremely familiar with her. He must have grasped every single detail of her body to be able to do it. Thinking of this, she naturally recalled the feeling of being completely naked in front of Luo Fan 1,000 years ago. Combined with the indescribable feeling she had for Luo Fan, she could not help but feel shy. After all, she was a Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator. All kinds of distracting thoughts were suppressed by her, and her complexion returned to normal. With a slight thought, she began to circulate the cultivation method. The cultivation method that Luo Fan had created was not a fundamental cultivation method, but a method that tempered one's perception. After Space Maiden activated the technique, she felt that the power in her body was being depleted at an unimaginable speed, and her senses were undergoing various indescribable changes during the process. It seemed to have increased by countless times. There didn't seem to be any change in strength. Space Maiden had expected this when she was studying the technique. As she activated the technique, she began to circulate the golden core technique that she had cultivated for billions of years. The power in her body kept being produced out of nowhere, replenishing her rapidly depleted power and barely maintaining the balance in her body. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, another 100 years had passed. In the past 100 years, Space Maiden hovered in front of Luo Fan with her legs crossed. She circulated the power in her body and continuously tempered her senses. She changed her senses bit by bit. Luo Fan did not continue to advance. Instead, he hovered in front of Space Maiden and closed his eyes, carefully comprehending the power that was so vast that it could envelop an unknown number of light years in the entire Earth's universe. With his current cultivation realm, it was naturally impossible for him to directly sense that power. However, he possessed the same power that he had obtained from Empty Maiden's body. He relied on the resonance between that power and the power that enveloped the world to sense that power. That was why he was able to enter the annihilation realm. He began to comprehend the chaotic state, even though it was only an insignificant sliver of it. 100 years of time was like a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. It had only deepened his understanding back then. If he wanted to take a step further, he would have to take a step further. If he wanted to take a step deeper, he would not have enough time. On this day, when Luo Fan was comprehending the profound mysteries, he suddenly sensed that there was an inexplicable change in the empty space girl in front of him. With a thought, he opened his eyes and looked at the empty space girl. Space Maiden had already opened her eyes. She had even stretched herself out and was no longer sitting cross-legged like before. Her eyes flickered with all sorts of mysterious lights. There seemed to be boundless space-time flashing within them. Even her aura kept skyrocketing during this process. In the blink of an eye, it had surpassed what she originally possessed. She had just become a connate grand luo, which was equivalent to the 7th level of the celestial realm, reaching the 8th level of the celestial realm. From the looks of it, it was very obvious that the Space Maiden had obtained great benefits in the process of cultivating the cultivation method that Luo Fan had taught her. Her cultivation realm had finally broken through her original bottleneck, and she had obtained the great progress she had now. As her aura grew stronger, a faint smile gradually appeared on Space Maiden's face. This kind of smile did not have a trace of dust. It was extremely beautiful. Even Luo Fan had to admit that this kind of smile that came from the heart appeared on the face of the air hostess was a kind of almost perfect combination. It almost evolved the word beauty to the extreme. The joy and excitement in Space Maiden's heart was not as faint as it seemed on the surface. On the contrary, she was so overjoyed that she could not control herself. Among the many connate Grand Luo who were invited to explore the whirlpool of time, her cultivation realm was the lowest. She had just become a connate Grand Luo. Under such circumstances, she had to spend 100 times more effort than other connate Grand Luo cultivators to catch up to the others during the exploration process. In this way, it was imaginable how much pressure she had to endure and how much hope she had for her cultivation realm to break through. However, it was obvious that the improvement of her cultivation realm was not something that could be achieved just because she wanted to. Without a fortuitous encounter, no growth in knowledge, and no suitable method, she could only sigh at the unbreakable cultivation realm barrier, no matter how much hope she had. In the past 100 years, the Space Maiden did not put much effort into improving her cultivation realm. In fact, all of her attention was placed on the cultivation method that Luo Fan had taught her. The reason why she circulated her cultivation method, it was only to maintain the balance in her body and to maintain the circulation of the cultivation method that Luo Fan had taught her. However, as the saying goes, a flower planted intentionally never blooms, while a willow planted unintentionally grows shade. With the help of the cultivation method, she changed her senses to the point that she could sense the power that was hidden within the source of her life. She suddenly felt the various flaws in her understanding of her own abilities in the past, and sensed the various mistakes she had made in her cultivation in the past. She could not help but start to make up for and modify these flaws and mistakes. Space Maiden cultivated the Golden Core path, but it was a path that was formed from her innate ability. The Golden Core path had gone through countless years of perfecting. There were even a few sages who had perfected it. Naturally, it was impossible for it to be incomplete. Therefore, the thing that restricted Space Maiden's cultivation realm, or rather, the bottleneck of Space Maiden, was the limitation of her knowledge of her own abilities. As such, in the past 100 years, Space Maiden had a new understanding of her own abilities. It was natural for her to make up for her flaws and correct her mistakes. She broke through the bottleneck that had shackled her for hundreds of millions of years. As a connate Grand Luo cultivator who had cultivated for billions of years, as long as she broke through the bottleneck, it was naturally extremely easy for her to improve her cultivation realm. That was why she had such a huge breakthrough. As the core of her comprehension over the past 100 years, she had an extremely deep understanding of the power that allowed her to possess that mysterious ability. Although she still could not compare to Luo Fan, she was already a few times stronger than she was 100 years ago. As her understanding of the power deepened, the ability that she displayed also greatly strengthened. At this moment, the world in Space Maiden's eyes was even flatter than it was 100 years ago. The superimposed space was now more distinct, and the time span that was displayed like a flat surface was several times longer than before. She could see through almost all the changes that had happened over millions of years. Of course, there was a limit to it. For an existence with an extremely high intrinsic quality like Luo Fan, Space Maiden's ability could not see through everything that was related to Luo Fan, including his past, present, and future. All she could see was a cloud of fog. She could not see through it at all. Space Maiden's aura permeated the area for a long time before she slowly retracted. Thank you for your help, fellow Taoist. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to break through the bottleneck, even after 1,000,000 years. Space Maiden bowed to Luo Fan. It's just a matter of reciprocity. The fact that you were able to break through is due to your own good fortune. It has nothing to do with me. Luo Fan smiled. After hearing Luo Fan's words, the Space Maiden felt a little disappointed for some reason. However, she did not show it. She only faintly smiled and said, I will remember your kindness in my heart. When she finished speaking, her expression returned to how it had been when Luo Fan first saw her. It was as if nothing had happened. What else could Luo Fan say to the Space Maiden like this? He could only smile and shake his head. The chaotic zones are the heart of the starfields of upheaval. To destroy the starfields of upheaval, we must first destroy this place. If you stay with me, we will be attacked by the starfields of upheaval. Why don't you leave the chaotic zones first? Space Maiden's expression didn't change much when she heard Luo Fan's words, but there was a slight tremor in her eyes. It was clear that she wasn't calm. However, as for how complicated the changes were, even she herself could not explain it clearly. After a moment of shock, she nodded. If that's the case, I won't keep you any longer. I hope you will see me off. Luo Fan nodded. He raised his hand and gently waved it. Space Maiden's figure suddenly shook. She moved in a mysterious trajectory and instantly disappeared from the domain formed by the time force and the space force around him. Then, she continued to move outwards and disappeared from the chaotic zone. When she reappeared, she was outside the chaotic zones. In front of her was the chaotic zones where Luo Fan resided. Space Maiden floated in front of the chaotic zones. She sighed, and the light in her eyes flickered. She was no longer as calm as she had been before. As soon as she came to a stop, an incredible power gathered from all over the starfields of upheaval. It poured into the chaotic zones in front of her. Time and space within the starfields of upheaval began to change in a way that was 1,000 times faster than before. An indescribable pressure bore down on Space Maiden. Space Maiden felt as if she was bearing the weight of the entire universe. It was as if the universe itself was hostile to her. It wanted to erase her from the infinite space and time. It wanted her to cease to exist. It's that strong. Space Maiden realized what was happening. She couldn't help but be shocked. The air hostess had also found the core of the era projection before Luo Fan at the previous checkpoint, so it was natural. She had also personally destroyed the core of the era projection and personally endured the era projection's attacks and backlash. She knew how strong the era projection's attacks were. But at this moment, when he sensed the powerful might coming from all directions, he realized how insignificant the resistance he felt from the era projection was. Luo Fan had begun to destroy the chaotic zones, and the entire starfields of upheaval had begun to rebel. As for the Space Maiden, she was the one who felt the most powerful might. It was just the shock waves of the era projection's power. The shock waves alone were so strong, so unstoppable. It was easy to imagine how much power Luo Fan had to endure in the chaotic zones. With this thought in mind, the resentment in her heart that she did not know where it came from had completely disappeared as she continued to retreat. Instead, an inexplicable worry began to appear in her heart. Space Maiden could see the starfields of upheaval more clearly now that her abilities had improved. She quickly retreated. She didn't run into the chaotic zones, which were impossible to defend against. Instead, she easily bypassed the chaotic zones and quickly retreated beyond the reach of the era projection's power. The moment the era projection appeared, the world that Empty Maiden saw crumbled with a loud bang, turning into countless fragments. Like a thick fog, they surged outwards continuously, directly devouring her, devouring everything within the range of her senses, causing her to fall into the thick fog. Within the thick fog, a strange light shone. Not even the thickest fog could hide it. Space Maiden could see it clearly. It was clear. Within the light, a clear man floated calmly. His back was to her, and in front of him was the source of the thick fog. It was the core of the starfields of upheaval. It was Luo Fan. Space Maiden had seen the era projection, and it was clear that Luo Fan had destroyed the chaotic zones. He had destroyed the core of the starfields of upheaval. Space Maiden had felt as if, as soon as she left the chaotic zones, a powerful force had descended upon her and entered the chaotic zones. But in reality, time was relative inside the chaotic zones. No matter how much time passed in the chaotic zones, it was only a moment in the outside world. Therefore, in reality, from the time Luo Fan sent the Space Maiden out of the chaotic region until he began to destroy the entire chaotic region, several years had passed for him. In those years, he had broken through the barriers of the chaotic zones. He had found the key to the chaotic zones, which was the core of the starfields of upheaval. It was a cloud of smoke that looked extremely faint. If this smoke had appeared in the mortal world, it would have been as inconspicuous as the smoke of a kitchen chimney at dusk. But for it to appear in the chaotic zones, it was unimaginably mysterious. Just its appearance was enough to show how different it was from the rest of the starfields of upheaval. This smoke was the source of the entire starfields of upheaval. It was the source of the starfields of upheaval. The power of upheaval that affected the starfields of upheaval came from this smoke. Luo Fan was very interested in the mysteries of the smoke. It took him several years to understand it. He had a deeper understanding of the power of upheaval. He had a better understanding of the power he had acquired from Space Maiden. He had perfect control over the power that came from that power. Then, realizing that he could no longer learn anything useful from the smoke, Luo Fan did not hesitate to use the opposite power of the smoke. He shrouded the smoke and compressed it. He wanted to destroy the smoke and cut off the source of the upheaval. Then the smoke would spread and destroy the entire starfields of upheaval. At that moment, a boundless power that Space Maiden sensed descended out of nowhere, blasting into the chaotic region, wanting to completely erase all traces of Luo Fan's existence in the boundless space-time. The result was obvious. The power of the poison was so strong that even Space Maiden couldn't withstand it. But for Luo Fan, it was too diffuse. Luo Fan's mastery of power allowed him to easily withstand the effects of the poison. He didn't even sustain a single injury. Soon, the smoky core of the starfields of upheaval was gone. With the core gone, the starfields of upheaval had lost its most important link. His own power was enough to cause the starfields of upheaval to collapse. When the air hostess saw him, the collapse was almost complete, and the chaotic zone had completely disappeared. To be continued. Chapter 867. At this moment, a mysterious power descended from nothingness and directly rushed into Luo Fan's body. It penetrated deep into his sea of consciousness, penetrated into his divine soul, impacted him, and assimilated him. This power was obviously the source of the starfields of chaos. It contained an infinite amount of information, an infinite amount of vital chi, and the boundless chaotic energy of the starfields of chaos. It encompassed everything, and in the eyes of other cultivators, it wasn't a power at all. Luo Fan had expected this power to appear. He had already made countless preparations. With a slight thought, the chaotic force that he had comprehended before instantly penetrated deep into his spirit, continuously slowing down the infiltration of that force. Then, countless changes occurred, guiding the power through a complex and abstruse path, out of his soul, out of his consciousness, and out of his body. In front of him, it coalesced into a mysterious, translucent ball of light. It was almost tangible, but at the same time, it didn't seem to exist. This was the manifestation of that power, the source of the entire starfield of chaotic strife. If a cultivator's eyesight was strong enough to penetrate the light covering the ball of light, he would be able to see that there was a boundless, ever-changing, and bizarre star domain inside the ball of light. Time and space within the starfields seemed to be in chaos, but they also existed on a deeper level. By this time, the surrounding space had completely stabilized. The Kane Grand Luo cultivators who had been scattered throughout the starfields of upheaval naturally gathered together when the starfields of upheaval were destroyed. The place where they had gathered was none other than the key location where the chaotic starfield had been destroyed. It was where Luo Fan was, and, at the moment, it was behind the Space Maiden. At this moment, for the chaotic starfields, it had only been a few days since the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators had stepped foot into the chaotic starfields. However, in less than a few days' time, Yi Futian's expression changed. No matter if it was Luo Fan, the Sky Maiden, or the Martial Emperor, all of them had experienced far more time in these few days. Almost every single one of them had lived for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. Some unlucky ones even experienced hundreds of millions of years. During this period of time, their experiences were all different. Some were involuntarily drifting in time, while others experienced a completely different space. It was so distorted that it didn't even look human. Some of them had even gone through countless schemes and life and death battles with their own selves. There are all sorts of strange things like this, and so on and so forth. If it wasn't for them being golden immortal realm cultivators at the very least, and possessing unimaginable ability to protect themselves, then perhaps more than half of them would have perished at this barrier. However, even then, the numerous Khanate golden immortal realm cultivators suffered unimaginable torture within this barrier. At this moment, all of their minds were in a daze, and they were unable to react for a moment. They had already escaped from the uncontrollable misfortune. There were even a few unlucky ones. When they saw the other Khanate golden immortal realm cultivators, they grew extremely wary, as if they had yet to awaken from the boundless battle. Fortunately, as Khanate golden immortal realm cultivators, they had incredible self-control. After a few moments of daze, they came to their senses and knew that they had passed the barrier. Long sighs could be heard from the crowd. Even the luckier ones could only smile wryly at the others, unable to maintain their composure. It was only then that they noticed Luo Fan and the Sky Maiden. Luo Fan was in the middle of dealing with the backlash of the starfields of chaos origin. In their eyes, it was completely natural. They weren't surprised in the slightest. However, the Sky Maiden had appeared so easily, and it seemed as if she had been there for a long time. This puzzled them. To them, even if the Sky Maiden had special abilities, the starfields of chaos shouldn't pose much of a threat to her. However, she had only recently become a Khanate golden immortal. It didn't matter what effect her special abilities had. There was no way she could be that much stronger than them. However, the truth was right in front of them. The Sky Maiden had it much easier than they had. Some of the more sensitive ones, such as Old Man Omniscient, could faintly sense that the Sky Maiden's aura, strength, and cultivation realm were much stronger than before. How could they possibly accept this? Many Khanate golden immortal realm cultivators were puzzled, while the Sky Maiden's emotions were complicated. After a while, she sighed and suppressed all distracting thoughts deep within her heart. Whether it was her expression or her eyes, they were no different from before. There was nothing different about her. Like the other Khanate golden immortal realm cultivators, she viewed the improvement of her cultivation realm and the improvement of her life essence as paramount, the only thing that could overwhelm everything else. Everything else, such as love and the like, was secondary to him. Although they weren't harmful to one's cultivation, wasting too much time and emotions on them would greatly affect one's cultivation. Luo Fan naturally didn't care about what the others were thinking. Now that he had control over the starfield's fundamental essence, he felt an inexplicable joy. He lifted a finger, and the starfield's fundamental essence trembled, then exploded into a miniature version of the starfield. He used the same method he'd used to deal with the 6 Stark Nebula's fundamental essence in the previous trial to deal with the starfield's fundamental essence. It was a crude method, but it was the simplest, most direct, and fastest. This last point was also the most important to Luo Fan. Since this method was effective, Luo Fan wasn't going to be stingy with using it a few more times. Already gone through this process once, and this time it was much smoother and faster. It didn't take long for the starfield's fundamental essence to be completely absorbed. The starfield's fundamental essence disappeared without a trace. What a pity. Compared to the first time, this time I gained a lot, but it was only a cumulative improvement. I didn't have a qualitative breakthrough. After absorbing the starfield's fundamental essence, Luo Fan didn't look happy. On the contrary, he looked regretful. In fact, this was the truth. He'd expected it. After all, the reason why he was able to obtain such a huge breakthrough in the 3,334th stage of the 6 Absolute Nebula was because he'd raised his cultivation to the peak of the 8th level of the immortal realm a long time ago, and he'd accumulated enough. Just a little bit more comprehension, and he would be able to break through the limit, and the origin of the 6 Absolute Nebula was like the last flame, directly pushing him through that barrier, thus allowing him to achieve such a breakthrough in the realm of cultivation. Although he'd stabilized his 9th stage of immortal realm, it was only stable. There was still a long way to go before he reached the peak of 9th stage. In other words, he was still a long way from the next breakthrough. In comparison, the Starfield Reverse Starfield's essence was far from enough to push him to that level. Naturally, it wouldn't give him the breakthrough he had last time. To be able to increase his accumulations was a testament to the power of the chaotic Starfield's source essence. Of course, knowing in advance was one thing, but when it really happened, he was disappointed. That was another matter, but the two were not contradictory. After sighing, Luo Fan turned around. Apart from a Sky Maiden, all the other innate golden immortal realm cultivators looked haggard, and even the martial monarch was no exception. After absorbing the Chaos Starfield's essence, Luo Fan's special abilities from the Empyrean Mistress had grown even stronger. After all, the Starfields of Chaotic Strife's prime was the chaotic force. To a certain extent, the chaotic force was similar to the Void Maiden's life essence. Because of this, Luo Fan's understanding of the power within Space Maiden's life essence had deepened. His control over it had improved, and he had reached the acme of perfection. In this way, the abilities that came with that power were naturally stronger. If Luo Fan was willing to possess such a formidable special ability, he would be able to see the past, present, and future experiences of all the golden immortals present here with a single glance. In other words, he was able to see their experiences in the starfields of chaos with a single glance. But Luo Fan wasn't in the mood to do so. The experiences of the innate golden immortal realm cultivators had no effect on him. It was all in the past. At this moment, in the face of a brand new trial, it was meaningless to dwell on the experience of the trial that had already passed. What was the point of looking at the specifics? This is the 3,336 trial, a land of nothingness. The way to pass is to destroy this place. Right at this moment, the treasure spirit of the Era Bridge seemed to have sensed Luo Fan's emotions, and it stopped waiting and sent its voice down from the void into the ears of the innate golden immortal realm cultivators and Luo Fan. Luo Fan's senses swept out, and he noticed that the almost boundless space around him was an expanse of nothingness. There wasn't even a trace of vital energy within it, and even the laws and principles were extremely sparse to the point of being practically non-existent. Such a place could only be called a land of nothingness. The innate golden immortal realm cultivators recovered from their shock when they heard the voice, and they barely managed to raise their spirits to pay attention to the surroundings. They couldn't help but reveal bitter expressions when they noticed the changes in the surroundings. They'd just come out from the boundlessly painful chaotic space zone, and it was precisely the moment they needed to recuperate and regulate their breathing. At such a moment, tossing them into this area where even the laws and principles were sparse to the point of being practically non-existent was simply like tossing extremely thirsty people into a boundlessly vast desert, and the pain they felt was obvious. Fellow Taoists, if you're tired, I can provide a place for all of you to regulate your breathing and recuperate. May I know what all of you think? Luo Fan noticed their expressions and knew that they were troubled, so he spoke with a smile on his face. Forget it. Based on these few trials, it's very likely that the following trials will be restricted areas with adverse environments. We're only slightly tired now, yet we have to rest. Wouldn't we have to rest every single trial in the future? Then what's the point of overcoming these trials? The Martial Emperor didn't hesitate at all when he heard Luo Fan. In the previous trial, the Martial Emperor didn't have it any easier than the other Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators. It was even to the extent that he was one of the more unfortunate ones, and he'd encountered many of them and fought with them. Compared to the other Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators, his time was much more difficult. However, even then, the Martial Emperor had never thought of giving up and reaping the benefits of others' hard work. This was the heart of an expert to strive to become stronger. Most of the other Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators had such a heart as well, and they weren't willing to rely on Luo Fan for protection, reaping the benefits of others' hard work. However, there are naturally a few who were truly exhausted, and they really wanted some time to recuperate and recuperate. However, no matter what their state of mind was, after the Martial Emperor spoke those words, all of them didn't have anything else to say. They could only agree with the Martial Emperor and hastily say that there was no need to do anything else. When he heard them say that, Luo Fan could only say that he'd misspoken, and then he let it go. After that, all of them naturally had nothing else to say, and they immediately split up and dispersed. They went to various parts of the void to find the core of this land of nothingness. Although the void's environment was harsh, and it was difficult for Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators to recuperate, it was much better than the chaotic starfields. At the very least, although the void was empty, time and space were still normal, and they wouldn't encounter another version of themselves. They wouldn't drift with the flow of time and space, and they wouldn't need to constantly expend a great deal of energy to resist the invasion of space and time. In contrast, they would only have to expend energy to lock themselves inside and out. They wouldn't allow any of their energy to leak out, and they wouldn't allow themselves to be assimilated into the void. This was as wonderful as heaven. Even if heaven made it difficult for them to recuperate, and they could only slowly recover their energy, it was still heaven. This void was boundless, and it could even be said that even its borders seemed to have been erased by the void, as if it didn't exist at all. In truth, Luo Fan was no stranger to the void. He was in the palace of the infinite void. Nearly 1,000,000 worlds away, there was a place even more empty than this void. Space didn't exist there, only a flat surface that he'd used his magic to create. In contrast, this void was even more empty than the void. But the void of the void was different. It was completely different from the void of Luo Fan's palace of the infinite void. The void of the palace of the infinite void was a kind of emptiness created by the absence of anything. The void of the void, on the other hand, was formed by the interaction of all sorts of wondrous elements. It wasn't pure emptiness. In other words, the void of the infinite void was real emptiness. The void of the void, on the other hand, only looked like emptiness. There was a deeper truth hidden within. Luo Fan moved forward unhurriedly in this boundless nothingness. There were few laws and laws in the void that maintained the necessary time and space. Hence, these laws and laws were naturally the key to comprehending the mysteries of the void. As Luo Fan advanced, he used the profound perspective he gained after becoming an exterminator to carefully comprehend the mysteries of these laws and laws. He worked hard to analyze the fundamental truth hidden behind them. This process was not an easy one for him either. Although there were so few laws and laws that they were almost non-existent compared to the other obstacles, there were still a lot of them in absolute numbers, far surpassing the imagination of living beings. Even though Luo Fan was in the exterminator realm and could vaguely sense the existence of the void comprehending realm, he could not easily find the countless laws and differentiate them. In particular, although these laws and laws were few in number, There are definitely many types of laws and laws that could maintain the integrity of time and space. Moreover, their structures were definitely extremely complicated and profound. Under such circumstances, it was clearly not an easy task to see through the profundities of the technique. According to the perspective of power, the void of nothingness was clearly the existence of the void of nothingness. This void of nothingness was clearly a power in a broad sense. It was the result of a mysterious combination of various factors, but it was not the kind of power that ordinary cultivators would think of in a narrow sense. However, the void of nothingness was just like its name. It had an unimaginable characteristic, and that was the void of nothingness. This void of nothingness was a huge problem for Luo Fan's comprehension. Even when Luo Fan entered the perspective of power, the perspective of the exterminator realm, or even the perspective of the past, present, and future that Space Maiden brought, he could not discover the existence of the void of nothingness. It was as if there had never been such a power. The void of nothingness only had these few laws and laws, but there was no other energy or substance. Faced with this predicament, Luo Fan flew in the void of nothingness for almost a month. During that time, he traveled through almost every inch of the void of nothingness that spanned tens of thousands of light years. However, he gained nothing in the end. Compared to a month ago, he only became more familiar with the laws and laws in the void of nothingness, but he did not make much progress in terms of essence. He did not make any progress in a month. This speed was unprecedented for Luo Fan, who had already passed more than 3,000 obstacles. It was almost unimaginable. Chapter 868. On this day, Luo Fan was walking to a place where the laws were intertwined. Suddenly, he sensed an inexplicable strange fluctuation that was transmitted into his senses. The ripple was extremely subtle and obscure. If it were not for the fact that Luo Fan had raised his senses to their limits after a month of nothing, he would definitely have missed it. Even Luo Fan, who was in death, might have missed it because he did not raise his senses to their limits. It was easy to imagine just how shocking the ripple was. There's actually such a ripple in this space. Where does it come from? A question immediately appeared in Luo Fan's mind. Unfortunately, the ripple had already disappeared completely, as if it had never appeared in the first place. Even though Luo Fan remembered that the ripple had once existed and even remembered the direction it had come from, he was unable to discover its origin no matter what. However, given Luo Fan's confidence in himself, he definitely did not think that the ripple was an illusion. With a thought, Luo Fan carefully sensed the direction where the ripple had come from. He did not miss a single inch of space and carefully checked for any abnormalities that were different from other places. The strands of laws and laws were distributed in an extremely sparse manner. It was the same in the direction where the ripple had come from. The structure of the laws and laws in this direction did not seem any different from the structure in other places. However, as he sensed further, he gradually sensed an extremely subtle difference in this direction. There was a vague sense of familiarity in the structure of the laws and the way they were constructed. Luo Fan's memory was extremely shocking. If he had seen this structure before, he would not have felt a sense of familiarity. Instead, he would have immediately remembered where he had seen it. There was only one possibility for Luo Fan to feel this sense of familiarity. He had seen it before. It was a structure that was different in general, but similar in detail. That was the only way. He might not have remembered where he had seen it just now. It was just a slight sense of familiarity. With this conclusion, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile. However, he still couldn't remember when he had seen something like this before, or what kind of mysteries this structure had. But since he already had a concept, it was a breakthrough, a huge breakthrough that broke the deadlock he had been stuck in for a month. Naturally, he was overjoyed. Luo Fan's smile didn't stay on his face for too long. After a while, it completely disappeared. After all, although there was a breakthrough, he had not yet found the mystery behind it. How could he waste too much time to be happy? Luo Fan's memories were as vast as the ocean. If an ordinary cultivator were to possess those memories that spanned trillions of years, it would definitely be enough to cause their soul to explode and completely erase all traces of their existence, causing them to perish on the spot. It was quite difficult to find a specific memory in such a vast amount of memories with such a sense of familiarity. With a slight thought, he sat cross-legged in the void, and his mind began to move at an extremely fast speed. The vast amount of memories quickly flashed through his mind. The memories that flashed through almost every instant were the memories of an ordinary cultivator for thousands or tens of thousands of years. Just like this, it took him 3 days and 3 nights. Luo Fan finally found the source of the familiarity of the structure in the void in a certain corner of his memory. I see. No wonder I couldn't find where the power of nothingness is. It turns out that there's no power of nothingness at all, only an extreme power. The void I saw was only half of the whole thing, and the other half was hidden in another space-time. There is still the other half hidden in another space-time. After discovering this source, Luo Fan suddenly came to a realization, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. That structure was a structure that divided space-time. When he was pursuing the god of time, he had experienced 2 space-time that seemed to be divided into yin and yang. It was the structure of the rules and laws between those 2 space-time. It was somewhat similar to the rules and laws that Luo Fan was familiar with. It was precisely because he was pursuing the god of time that he did not care about anything else, and he only glanced at that structure. Therefore, when he first discovered the structure of the rules and laws, he only felt that it was familiar, but he did not immediately recall it. After understanding the source of this sense of familiarity and combining it with the various discoveries that he had made in this void in the past month, how could Luo Fan not understand the mystery of this void? With this understanding, the fog-like nothingness in front of Luo Fan seemed to have opened a huge door for him. For a time, the world was brightly lit. With a slight thought, Luo Fan stood up and carefully integrated the surrounding rules and laws and compared it with the various structures that he had seen in that strange space-time. Although the rules and laws here were essentially similar to the space-time that was inside and outside of each other, the details of the 2 were worlds apart. The rules and laws of the 2 space-time were like an ordinary camera, showing all the details without leaving anything out. As for the rules and structure of this void, it was like the most outstanding Chinese painting master, using the simplest and least amount of freehand brushstrokes to sketch out its appearance. The images obtained with the camera were naturally extremely detailed, and it was naturally not much more difficult to analyze the mystery of it than in reality. Using the freehand strokes of traditional Chinese painting to analyze the mystery of the void was naturally countless times more difficult than in reality. Under such circumstances, if Luo Fan wanted to analyze the true mystery of this void, find the extreme power that caused this void to become like this, and find the other space-time hidden behind this void, he naturally needed to compare the rules and laws of the space-time in front of him with the structure of the 2 space-time and turn the simplest and freehand strokes into a complete form. Only then would he be able to analyze it. After finding the way, everything was no longer a problem for Luo Fan. The only thing that mattered was the amount of time it took. In the next 3 days, Luo Fan found the key point. In a place that looked no different from other places, the rules and laws formed an extremely exquisite and profound structure. It matched the key of the structure that was inside and outside of each other, and communicated with another space-time, balancing that space-time with the void in front of him through some mysterious method that could not be described with words. This is it. Luo Fan looked at the structure. An inexplicable smile appeared on his face. In the past 3 days, he had walked through the void within a radius of tens of thousands of miles, and he had studied almost every rule and law here thousands of times. He had an extremely deep understanding of the laws and the structure of the entire void. The rules and laws of the void were simple, but they were not simple. It was like the key left behind by refining the incomparably complex rules and laws between the 2 space-times that were inside and outside of each other. Any of the rules and laws had an irreplaceable role. Even the slightest change in the structure of any of the rules and laws would cause an earth-shattering impact on the structure of the void. This kind of influence might not be able to destroy the void. However, it would definitely trigger a violent reaction from the entire void, causing the void to produce a boundless power that would completely wipe out the living beings who had changed these rules and laws. Before finding the core of the void and destroying the absolute confidence of the entire void, Luo Fan obviously wouldn't act rashly to alert the enemy. Carefully sensing the mysterious structure that seemed to be connected to another space-time in front of him, Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed. An indescribably powerful force suddenly shook and rushed out of his finger, directly rushing toward the core of the structure. Suddenly, he dove into it. That power was extremely mysterious, containing all sorts of mysteries of time and space, as well as all sorts of insights that Luo Fan had gained in this void over the past month. Luo Fan's control of power had already reached the acme of perfection. The moment the power blasted into the mysterious structure, he felt that the power had broken through layers of mysterious barriers and arrived at a brand new space and time that he had never seen before. As expected, with a thought, Luo Fan knew that his previous guess was correct. Sure enough, the space-time he saw was only a part of this void. With a thought, the power released by Luo Fan suddenly rose up. The originally minute laws and structures of laws suddenly expanded. In the blink of an eye, they expanded from the originally imperceptible specks of dust to form a door of different heights. The door seemed to be illusory. It was only a vague outline in the void. Even the center of the door was a scene of nothingness. There was no difference between the world behind the door and the void in front of him. However, Luo Fan would not be misled by such appearances. The world that he saw was completely different from the world that ordinary living beings saw. In his eyes, there were countless laws and laws behind the door, outlining an extremely complete world. It seemed like there was nothingness in front of him at any time, but as long as he passed through the door, he would discover a brand new world. The power he released still existed in the space-time. Right at this moment, an oppressive force appeared from nowhere and gradually grew stronger. The pressure came from a void, from the entire void. It was a kind of backlash from the entire void against him for breaking the laws and structures of laws. Naturally, Luo Fan was not afraid of such pressure. However, he also knew that if he continued to wait, the pressure would continue to grow stronger. In the end, it would break through his limits, and he would not be able to bear it. Therefore, he did not hesitate. With a thought, his body darted into the door along with the power he released earlier. After he entered the door, the power that had opened the door suddenly retracted and returned to his body. The door naturally turned into nothingness after losing the power that had opened it. It was as if it had never existed. At that moment, Luo Fan had arrived in another mysterious space-time. This place no longer looked like the absolute nothingness from before. On the contrary, it seemed to have everything. The entire space-time did not exist in the form of a cosmic starry sky that was commonly seen in the universe on Earth. Instead, it existed in the form of an ocean. Stepping into this space-time was like stepping into a boundless underwater world. There was an endless amount of viscous liquid all around. Within the liquid, there were endless substances that floated, piled up, or flowed in a strange way. Moreover, the numerous rules and laws were like densely packed cloth that covered the entire space-time, practically wrapping up the entire space-time. There was no gap at all. This isn't ordinary seawater. This is acquired origin energy of heaven and earth. Luo Fan could not help but be shocked when he realized what the viscous liquid around him was. To Luo Fan, he had seen many condensed innate energy and chaotic energy into liquid, not to mention the acquired origin energy of heaven and earth into liquid. However, at that moment, in this space-time, the acquired origin energy of heaven and earth existed in such a form. It made him feel amazed. There was no other reason. The area of this space-time was just too big. It was calculated in millions of light years. Such a huge area was filled with the acquired origin energy of heaven and earth that existed in liquid form. One could imagine how enormous the acquired origin energy of heaven and earth was. The liquid form of the acquired origin energy of heaven and earth could not be stabilized. However, it was so stable and natural in this place. It was almost as if the acquired origin energy of heaven and earth should exist in such a viscous liquid form. Although this phenomenon was beyond the common sense of ordinary living beings, to Luo Fan, it was just a sideshow of the mysterious structure of the laws of this space-time. Just as Luo Fan was about to comprehend the structure of the laws of this space-time, he suddenly sensed the aura of a living being flashing in the air not far away. There's a living being? Luo Fan could not help but be interested. There was actually a world in this space-time. Although this was not incomprehensible, it was also something he had not expected. With a slight thought, he lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure directly crossed a distance of thousands of miles and directly arrived at the location where the aura of the living being was. I see. When he saw the living being, Luo Fan could not help but come to a sudden realization and could not help but laugh. That living being was not a living being of flesh and blood, but a kind of vitality living being. Looking at its shape, it looked like a long snake. It was at least 100 feet long, and its thickness was like a bucket. At this moment, the living being was coiled up into a ball. The snake's head was drooping, as if it was sleeping. Its body seemed illusory, and its color was extremely similar to the viscous, acquired vitality of the world around it. If one was not careful, they would definitely ignore it and think that it was just a coincidental condensation of vitality into the shape of a snake. They would not think that it was a living being at all. As a vitality living being, it naturally could only exist in a space-time that was rich in vitality. For ordinary living beings of flesh and blood, the space-time in front of them had to be strong to a certain extent to survive. But for vitality living beings, it was basically the best living environment, just like fish in the sea, just like the long snake in front of him. Although it looked exaggerated, its absolute strength was not even comparable to that of a mortal martial arts expert. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed, and a wave of power deterred the long snake. Then, with a move, the long snake came in front of him without any resistance. The long snake seemed to have fallen into animal hibernation. Even when it was wrapped in Luo Fan's power and placed in front of him, it did not react at all. Its head was still drooping, as if it was completely unaware of any changes in the outside world. Luo Fan could not be bothered to care about the long snake. He raised his hand and pointed at the long snake's head. A mysterious power of perception was emitted, directly entering the long snake's head, instantly cutting into its memories and carefully sensing the long snake's memories. The lifespan of vitality living beings was generally longer than that of flesh and blood living beings. Although this long snake was not even comparable to that of a mortal martial arts expert in terms of power and life essence, its lifespan was tens of thousands of times longer than that of ordinary people. For example, the long snake in Luo Fan's hand had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Even after living for hundreds of thousands of years, it was still in the prime of its life, and it still had hundreds of thousands of years of life that it could squander. After living for hundreds of thousands of years, this long snake had naturally accumulated endless memories. With the interpretation of its memories, Luo Fan did not need to walk through this space-time to naturally have a deep understanding of the space-time. In this space-time, there was no inborn intelligent life. But just like any other space-time, although there was no inborn intelligent life, it did not cut off the path of life to obtain wisdom through cultivation. In particular, in this space-time, the acquired essence of the world was so rich that it made it easier for life to break through and obtain wisdom. In the billions of years that this space-time had existed, countless life had obtained wisdom through various kinds of cultivation, and the emergence of wisdom had in turn promoted cultivation. In the end, today, it had formed an extremely prosperous cultivation civilization. Although this long snake had not developed wisdom, it had definitely seen and heard a lot. Those were things it had heard and seen unintentionally, and it could not understand at all. But with just a slight analysis, Luo Fan was able to reconstruct the general appearance of this space-time through what it had seen. Chapter 869. The 9 major areas of space-time were not divided like normal land boundaries, but according to the flow of Yuan Qi. After all, even life was a Yuan Qi life form, so the way to divide the boundaries naturally depended on Yuan Qi. The area that Luo Fan was currently in was as wide as a few thousand light years. In this area, there were hundreds of gathering points for intelligent living beings. Each gathering point had at least hundreds of millions of intelligent Yuan Qi life forms. A gathering point for hundreds of millions of Yuan Qi life forms must be extremely lively and prosperous. Luo Fan could not help but be interested when he discovered this from the snake's memory. With a thought, he searched through the memories of a long snake and found out the location of the closest gathering point among the hundreds of gathering points. With a thought, he directly threw the Yuan Qi snake, and with a move of his body, he turned into an escape light and flew toward the gathering point. Although the gathering point for Yuan Qi life forms was the closest to where he was, it was only relative to the other gathering points. In fact, it was still several light years away from where he was. If Luo Fan's speed was not faster than the speed of light, it might take him thousands of years to get there. This was obviously not something he could waste. Even with such a stream of light, it took Luo Fan half a day to cross the distance of several light years and arrive at the gathering point. The gathering point for the intelligent Yuan Qi life forms was almost as large as a star system. Although there were hundreds of millions of Yuan Qi life forms, they seemed extremely sparse when scattered across such a huge area. It was almost impossible to see a single life form within tens of millions of kilometers. Even the buildings were made of Yuan Qi, and most of them were spherical, unlike the buildings that Luo Fan had seen before. Looking at it from afar, it was as if there were many strange eggs floating in the boundless ocean, appearing extremely special. Luo Fan floated in the boundless Yuan Qi liquid of the world. He could sense that there were hundreds of millions of strands of life force, both strong and weak. Every strand of life force represented a life. The stronger the vitality, the more powerful the life. After carefully examining it, Luo Fan frowned slightly. Among these beings, there was actually one that was not any weaker than Luo Fan. According to their realms, it was not any weaker than the destruction realm. Perhaps it was because the cultivation method was not exquisite enough and could not be compared to the true annihilation realm. Regardless of whether it was martial monarchs or others, all of them were like Lu Yi before such a formidable existence, and they were completely powerless to resist. It seems that it's not good to summon Brother Wu and the others here to recuperate. Luo Fan instantly dispelled some of the thoughts that had originally appeared in his mind and thought to himself. He had come to this place to destroy this land of nothingness. It was to destroy the habitat of all living beings. Under such circumstances, he was naturally hostile to all living beings in this space-time. There was no room for negotiation at all. Hence, even though he was interested in the powerful being that was comparable to the destruction realm, he had no intention of communicating with it. With a slight thought, he lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure instantly streaked across the void and arrived at the gathering place. He arrived before the huge egg-shaped building that was surrounded by thousands of egg-shaped buildings. The reason why he could traverse the void instead of using the method of flight light to move forward was naturally because traversing the void was more convenient and faster. It was also more concealed. As for this method of concealment, convenience, and speed, Luo Fan had not used it before. The reason was simple. He could not do it before. He could not traverse the void as he wished in this space-time, like in other regions. The structure of the laws of this space-time was too dense, and the stability of the space was too shocking. Although it was not comparable to the primordial world, it was not much weaker than the boundless world. The result of the combination of such dense laws and the stable space was something that Luo Fan would not be able to analyze in a short period of time. Naturally, he would not be able to traverse the void. The reason why he was able to do it was because he had been constantly analyzing the void and the laws along the way. Only then could he barely possess the ability to traverse the void. When he arrived here, Luo Fan did not hesitate at all. He raised his hand and grabbed at the space in front of him. An indescribably mysterious power surged out from his body and condensed into a huge hand in front of him. It directly fused with the void, completely bypassing the obstruction of all physical objects and yuan-chi structures. It easily reached into the huge egg-shaped building and grabbed at the most powerful life force in the entire gathering place. This life force was comparable to a powerful being in the destruction realm. There was naturally no need to mention how sensitive its senses were. Furthermore, it had lived in this gathering place for countless years. It had long formed an indescribable connection with this place and could already resonate with it. Everything that happened here was within its senses. Before Luo Fan attacked, he had kept his presence hidden and did not reveal any information from his body. He did not reveal any existence that could be sensed by the outside world. This life force that was comparable to the destruction realm was naturally unable to sense it. However, when Luo Fan made his move and condensed a powerful force, it was naturally sensed by the beast. A furious roar suddenly rang out. The roar was an extremely strange language that sounded like the whistling of the wind. When Luo Fan heard the voice, he immediately sensed the extremely domineering and boundless will within it. Offending the king's tent is a capital crime. While speaking, an incomparably powerful force suddenly appeared out of thin air, directly colliding with the huge arm that Luo Fan had condensed. The power was unimaginably condensed and contained enough power to destroy the world. When it collided with Luo Fan's hand, it suddenly erupted with an earth-shaking explosion. An indescribably powerful shock wave was generated from the point of collision and swept out in all directions. In an instant, the huge egg-shaped building was torn to pieces by the shock wave and turned into nothing. Even the thousands of smaller egg-shaped buildings that surrounded the egg-shaped building were scattered by the shock wave. Almost all of them were turned to dust along with the living beings within. They returned to the endless viscous energy in the surroundings. Shrill and miserable cries filled the heavens and the earth, and they carried pain and resentment that caused anyone's heart to tremble. However, although many living beings were crushed to dust by the shockwave, even more living beings were alarmed. However, even more vitality creatures were alarmed. Countless vitality creatures flew out from various egg-shaped buildings and hurriedly rushed towards Luo Fan's location. Countless howls like the wind rang in Luo Fan's ears from all directions, as if they were cursing and yelling. Faced with the increasing number of living beings and the increasingly unpleasant curses and yells, Luo Fan remained unfazed. There was even a faint smile on his face. Although he did not show any contempt, his attitude of disregard was what made many living beings hate him even more. This land of nothingness still belonged to the Earth's universe, so it was naturally under the influence of the great path of the Earth's universe. Since it was under the influence of the great path of the Earth's universe, the natural Tao aptitude was the most suitable for cultivation. These living beings were not born with intelligence. Instead, they had gone through various opportunities from ordinary living beings. Only after many years of cultivation did they refine their original bodies and gain intelligence. After refining their original bodies, the bodies they transformed into would naturally be the most suitable bodies for cultivation in the Earth's universe. Even the living beings that first appeared did not know what form they should take. After billions of years of development and the experiences and lessons of countless living beings, this was a consensus that had been reached at this point. Therefore, although they were all living beings of vitality, they all looked like humanoid living beings. Although they were somewhat transparent and could be seen to be condensed from vitality, if one ignored this point, they would be no different from a normal human with flesh and blood. You deserve to die. A voice rang out from the ruins of the huge egg-shaped building in front of Luo Fan. Then, a young man who looked like he was wrapped in golden armor and exuded an extremely strong aura. He didn't seem to have a trace of Yuan Qi, as if he was a living being made of flesh and blood, flew out of the ruins with a face full of killing intent and slowly floated towards Luo Fan. Just now, Luo Fan had only casually formed his hand. Although it was powerful, its essence was not very high. The shockwave from the collision had destroyed all the egg-shaped buildings within a radius of tens of thousands of miles. The buildings had long since been smashed into smithereens and scattered in all directions, merging into the thick, viscous chi of heaven and earth. In the face of this menacing living being, Luo Fan smiled and waved his hand. In an instant, time and space changed. A space-time cage appeared, trapping the living being within. Having passed more than 3,000 checkpoints on the Bridge of Eras, Luo Fan had long since accumulated an endless amount of mysterious techniques. What he had learned in the chaotic starfields had given him an understanding of space-time that was beyond the imagination of all living beings. To him, creating a space-time cage was a matter of mere thought. In the face of this space-time cage, the living being's face was filled with rage. It shook madly, and the vast power in its body rushed out of its acupuncture points. It left its body and turned into a 9-colored flame, burning the space-time cage that completely enveloped it. The time and space above the space-time cage sizzled, and it looked like the flame was about to break the space-time cage. Such a technique was clever but clumsy. It was a straightforward method of crushing and destroying delicate attacks with brute force. It was the most difficult method to resist. In the face of such resistance, Luo Fan nodded to himself. To be able to use such a method to resist the space-time cage proved that this living being was not simply a powerful being. Not only did it focus on the evolution of its own life essence, but it also possessed extraordinary fighting skills. Its understanding of combat was not shallow either. However, this was understandable. If it was not skilled in combat, how could it have become the ruler of a place with hundreds of millions of living beings? It would have been overthrown long ago. Even an existence comparable to an exterminator was not invincible. In the face of the living being's clever but clumsy resistance, Luo Fan did not give up on the idea of using the space-time cage to lock it in. With a thought, he lifted his hand and pressed it down. A wave of time and space power shot out from his hand, piercing through the void and enveloping the space-time cage. In the blink of an eye, the space-time cage had become thicker by 1,000 times. Even the material of the space-time cage had become stronger by 1,000 times. The space-time cage. It was originally formed from the special changes of time and space. With the addition of time and space energy, it would naturally allow the time and space that could be changed to increase. Naturally, it would be able to create an even thicker and more stable space-time cage. In the face of such a space-time cage, the living being's eyes burst with dazzling light, and the anger on its face almost solidified. A murderous intent and murderous aura that could make an ordinary living being's mind collapse and thoughts vanish frantically rushed out of its body, spreading in all directions. It even affected the endless Yuan Qi living beings in the surroundings. They did not dare to stay where they were and could only constantly retreat. Their faces were filled with fear. Among the Yuan Qi living beings that constantly retreated, there were even living beings at the Great Perfection Realm. Although the Yuan Qi living being's 9-colored flames constantly burned the strengthened space-time cage, it could no longer produce any effect. However, it was difficult for it to produce any effect. Although it did not miss, it did not even make a sound. It was as if it was just burning nothingness. The living being's angry expression was mixed with a hint of disbelief and disbelief. With a roar, it raised its hands and clenched its fists. Endless 9-colored flames gushed out of the acupoints all over its body and gathered on its fists. It raised them high and suddenly punched at the space-time cage that Luo Fan had condensed. Crack! An earth-shattering sound rang out. The fist wrapped in 9 colored flames acted on the space-time cage without any obstruction or concealment. It was just that this loud sound was the only thing that could be heard. The space-time cage withstood this astonishing bombardment. However, there wasn't even the slightest tremor, let alone any powerful shock waves that swept through the surroundings. There was no vibration, but it did not mean that the living being's bombardment of the space-time cage did not have any effect. After the bombardment, an indescribably powerful force suddenly swept back from the space-time cage, directly bombarding the 9 colored flames on the living being's hands into pieces. Then, it continued to spread upwards. It completely crushed its fist, then its wrist, its forearm. In the end, half of its body was completely turned into powder. Only then did it have no strength to continue and disappear without a trace. During this process, the living being did not let out any screams, but its expression was extremely ugly. Its originally powerful and unparalleled vitality gradually weakened during this process. When the power could no longer move upwards and completely disappeared, its vitality had been reduced to less than 1% of its original strength. Although this vitality was powerful, it was already insignificant compared to its original strength. As a living being that was comparable to the perishment realm, the destruction of half of its body clearly could not kill it. In a few breaths, as its vitality circulated, that half of its body had recovered. However, its vitality, which had already been reduced to less than 1% of its original strength, was once again reduced by more than 10 times. Looking at it, the backlash from the space-time cage had reduced the living being's vitality to less than 1,000th of its original strength. This vitality was even only slightly stronger than that of a living being at the perfected perfection realm. Compared to Luo Fan, it was like an ant. Even after suffering such a great injury, this creature was not an ignorant creature. Its intelligence was definitely at the top among the many vitality creatures here. Otherwise, it would not have been able to maintain its absolute rule over this gathering place. The other party had only raised its hand to launch 2 attacks, and it had already been completely locked on. After resisting, it had even suffered unbearable damage. How could this not make the living being understand the huge difference between it and Luo Fan? Who are you? What do you want to do? You've stopped the kings from signing the agreement. If you want to challenge the king, you have to sign the rules during the meeting of the kings. If you challenge at any other time, even if you win, you'll be attacked by the other kings. You won't be able to replace me as the king here, the living being said in a dignified manner. When Luo Fan heard that, he knew that the civilization in this space-time was more prosperous than he had imagined. It had already formed a system that was similar to a parliament, and there were all sorts of compromising rules. However, it was obvious that the living being had guessed wrongly this time. Luo Fan was not the same as it, nor was he the so-called king of this space-time. The reason he had attacked the living being was not to obtain the position of king, but to study the living being and see what mysteries it possessed. If it was possible, he could use the living being to find the core of this void. That would be even better. Even if he did not find it, it would not be a loss. As he shook his head, Luo Fan said indifferently, "You don't need to care who I am. My goal is not to become the king here." Chapter 870. The creature's expression changed drastically when it heard Luo Fan's words, and its eyes showed uncertainty. It seemed to be wondering if Luo Fan was one of its enemies from the past, and had come to take revenge now that it had cultivated successfully. For any creature that had cultivated successfully, it must have experienced countless battles and stepped over countless corpses in order to cultivate successfully. During this process, there would naturally be countless enemies. If an enemy had cultivated successfully and came to take revenge, it was not something inconceivable. However, no matter how much this creature thought about it, it couldn't figure out which enemy Luo Fan was. Of course, this didn't mean that Luo Fan's appearance wasn't familiar to him, or that he had seen any of his enemies before. For an existence whose cultivation had reached his level, appearance was no longer the most important thing. not to mention vitality creatures like them. Even ordinary creatures of flesh and blood could easily change their appearance and become completely different from the past. It naturally could not rely on this as a basis to identify someone. The reason it felt that it had never seen Luo Fan was because of Luo Fan's aura, because of the special life that Luo Fan constantly revealed. One's appearance could be changed, but it was difficult to change one's aura. Changing one's special life was thousands of times more difficult than changing one's aura. Who are you? What kind of grudge do you have against me? We both have endless years now. No matter what kind of hatred it is, I can use the endless years to make up for it. Even if it's the hatred of killing my father or stealing my wife, I believe I can find a way to eliminate it. The king struggled to maintain his calm. This was the mindset of all immortals. For immortals, compared to eternal time, all hatred was insignificant. Even the hatred of killing one's father or stealing one's wife was not irresolvable in the face of time. If it could not be resolved, then it was only because the benefits were not enough. For example, on Earth in Luo Fan's previous life, there was a short story. If a man who seemed to view money as dirt was asked how much it would take for him to leave his beloved girlfriend, the answer would be 100,000, 1,000,000, 10,000,000, 100,000,000, 1,000,000,000, 10,000,000,000, and 100,000,000,000. Very few people could resist the impact of 100,000,000 without being moved. Cultivators were different from mortals, but there was not much of a difference in their nature. It was just that mortals cared about money, while cultivators cared about other things. Hearing the creature's words, Yishuan faintly smiled. Luo Fan smiled and shook his head indifferently. He was too lazy to say anything more to him. With a thought, he waved his hand, and the space-time cage floated towards him with the creature, landing in front of him in the blink of an eye. Looking at the creature's somewhat panicked expression in the space-time cage, Luo Fan shook his head. He gently reached out with his right hand, directly passing through the space-time cage that the creature could not shake even after exhausting all of its strength, and directly imprinted on the creature's head. During this process, the creature displayed the superb combat methods that had formed through tens of millions of years of fighting, frantically dodging Luo Fan's arm. In the end, however, it found that no matter how it dodged or how hard it tried, Luo Fan's arm was like water flowing downwards. It was something he couldn't block or dodge at all. It could only watch as the arm pressed gently on its head, as if it did not exert any strength at all. It had only lived for tens of millions of years, and what it cultivated was only the accumulation of vitality that was limited to this space-time for billions of years. As for Luo Fan, it was unknown how many trillions of years he had lived. What he cultivated was the accumulation of the three perfect worlds, the Great Tianyuan world, the Primordial world, and the Earth universe. Just this amount alone was enough to show how great the gap between it and Luo Fan was. Moreover, Luo Fan had even started to sort out his worldview and step onto the true path of cultivation. He was improving at an unimaginable speed in all aspects. How could the creature possibly dodge Luo Fan's seemingly simple but intricate seal that contained supreme profundities? Seeing that it could not even dodge a casual seal, the creature's eyes were filled with despair. The power in its body surged, and it was about to self-destruct so that it would not be humiliated by Luo Fan again. As an existence that had controlled this gathering place for tens of millions of years, it still had the backbone to perish together with someone else. Luo Fan sighed softly, and his right hand trembled a few times. A vibrating power was transmitted from his right hand, instantly affecting the creature's entire body. It completely disintegrated all the power that the creature was gathering to self-destruct. No matter how fiercely the creature's will was stimulated, and no matter how hard it tried to activate the power in its body, it could not produce the slightest effect. Even its body could not help but feel sore and limp. It withered, almost turning into a puddle of mud. At this moment, the surrounding vitality creatures finally realized that their king had fallen into the hands of the king who had appeared out of nowhere. For a moment, their reactions were mixed. Most of the creatures fled in all directions, but there was a small number of creatures that were loyal to the king. Seeing their king fall into the hands of the king, they did not care about the unimaginable gap between them and Luo Fan. They activated all their power and attacked Luo Fan with the other loyal creatures. They wanted to give Luo Fan a headache and benefit their king. Among these creatures, the strongest was only at the great perfection stage. If these thousands of living beings were to gather together, their strength would be considered an unimaginably huge force in the Earth universe. It wouldn't be difficult for them to occupy a few galaxies. But for Luo Fan, they were all at the level of ants. Luo Fan's complexion didn't change in the slightest in the face of these agitated creatures who were bombarding and shouting. With a sweep of his left hand, an invisible force was instantly emitted from his hand, going around the many creatures in an instant. This formless energy was none other than an incomparably pure destructive force. It had the effect of disintegrating the void, disintegrating time, and disintegrating everything. After being swept by such a force, the many living beings were unable to resist at all. All of them were reduced to dust, and, as the surrounding origin chi washed over them, they completely fused into the sticky liquid origin chi of heaven and earth in the surroundings like smoke. It was as if these creatures had never existed in this world. Faced with Luo Fan, who was as powerful as a demon, the remaining creatures were in a state of hesitation. They wanted to attack Luo Fan, but they could not muster up the courage. The creatures that wanted to escape but could not bring themselves to do so were finally overcome by fear. With a shout, they scattered like a swarm of bees. This wave of separation and retreat continued to spread. At first, it only affected an area of several 100,000 kilometers around the king, but after a while, it had already affected the entire settlement, causing the massive settlement that spanned several light years to shake violently. All of the primordial chi creatures stimulated their potential and fled this gathering place in a frenzied manner. It was as if they were afraid that they would suffer unimaginable misfortune if they were even a little slower. Luo Fan did not care about these creatures' escape, nor did he have any intention of stopping them. He was not a perverted existence that took pleasure in killing. To him, killing was just a means to achieve his goal. If it was not necessary, he would not do it. He had come here only to see what secrets the powerful creatures in this space-time were hiding and to study the powerful creatures that were born and bred in this space-time. There was no other reason. Although there were many creatures that had escaped, and they might spread the news of his evil deeds after escaping. Even if it attracted other powerful creatures to come and attack him, it did not affect him much. If his research was fruitful and he found the core of this land of nothingness, naturally, he would immediately destroy the core and make this land of nothingness vanish. If his research was fruitless, he would not stay here. Instead, he would go to other places and search for the core of this land of nothingness. Naturally, he would not have to worry about other powerful creatures coming to attack him. If he did not have to fear anything, why would he need to kill to stop those creatures from escaping? After restraining that creature, the space-time cage that Luo Fan had constructed earlier collapsed with a loud bang. It turned back into the power of time and space, which drilled back into Luo Fan's body. It merged back into the power in his body that was like the source of power. With Luo Fan's self-confidence, he obviously didn't think that the creature in front of him, which already had no ability to resist, would be able to escape his control and hurt him. Although the creature's body was sore and limp, it had not completely lost consciousness. However, when it saw Luo Fan casually kill a few of its loyal subordinates, its body trembled and twitched. Its eyes instantly turned red, and a kind of baleful killing intent directly materialized. The blood-red aura crazily rushed towards Luo Fan and continuously attacked him. It seemed as if it wanted to make Luo Fan pay the price with its baleful aura. However, it was very clear that even its full power did not cause too much trouble for Luo Fan. Moreover, the creature's life force was only 1,000th of what it had been before, and its body was sore and limp. The baleful killing intent did not even have the right to touch Luo Fan. With a slight tremble from Luo Fan's body, it completely turned into dust and broke free from the creature's control. It was completely absorbed and fused with the extremely viscous, grand, post-celestial origin chi of the world around him. As for the creature's eyes, which were filled with hatred and looked like it wanted to eat his flesh and bones, it did not affect him at all. It did not make him feel the slightest bit uncomfortable. Luo Fan was very open-minded about this. Every creature had their own standpoint. To him, these creatures were just projections. They were just illusions. They were just illusions that would hinder him from passing through. To these living beings, he was the most evil demon that had destroyed their world. Under such a difference in standpoint, it was not strange for the creature to hate him so much that it wanted to eat his flesh and bones. Could it be that he could control them to not have any thoughts of hatred? Under that hateful gaze, Luo Fan sent out his perception and directly invaded the creature's body. In an instant, he had already clearly seen the body of that creature. The creature's essence was origin chi, but at its current cultivation level, it had long since reached the void transformation stage. Its body was no different from a normal creature of flesh and blood. However, because it was intrinsically a yuan chi living being, its ability to control and use yuan chi had reached the acme of perfection. With such control, the technique it cultivated was naturally related to origin chi. It was a technique that gathered boundless origin chi to burn and unleashed boundless power. This technique was extremely explosive, and its destructive power was also extremely shocking. If it had not met Luo Fan, any Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivator would not be able to withstand 2 or 3 attacks from it. There are those who burn origin chi into flames, so there are naturally those who compress origin chi into various other forms. It seems that the cultivation civilization of this world walks the path of using origin chi. Luo Fan thought about the creature's cultivation technique and had a rough understanding of the cultivation civilization of this space-time. The mysteries on the surface of the creature's body were naturally not the fundamental reason why Luo Fan destroyed a gathering point of origin chi creatures. After understanding the mysteries on the surface of the creature's body, Luo Fan did not stop. His perception directly spread out along the creature's soul. In the blink of an eye, he rushed through the layers of obstacles and entered a place that was similar to a sea of consciousness. He saw the creature's soul. The creature's soul did not look like a Khanate Tao aptitude. In other words, it was not in the shape of a human. Instead, it was a pill that was extremely mysterious. The pill was extremely mysterious. It shone brightly and was perfectly round without any flaws. It slowly rotated in the sea of consciousness. The entire sea of consciousness seemed to rotate along with it. Everything in the sea of consciousness kept changing as it rotated, constantly evolving into all sorts of strange scenes. It's somewhat similar to a golden core. This was the first thought that came to Luo Fan when he saw the pill. However, this was clearly not a golden core cultivated through the golden core path. This pill was condensed from the purest essence of yuan chi. It looked smooth and round, but in fact, its surface was engraved with countless patterns. Every single one of these patterns contained unfathomable mysteries. Each pattern corresponded to a rule or law in the void. It was as if the pill had imprinted the rules and laws of the void in the outside world on its surface. Because of this imprint, the pill had all sorts of incredible uses. For example, the pressure of the rules and laws of the outside world on the pill was reduced to almost non-existent. Another example was that the pill could naturally draw in the endless origin chi in the outside world and naturally transform it into a purer power. For example, this pill could become more compact, more solid, and more difficult to destroy. Luo Fan moved his mind, and his perception directly entered the pill. The pill was formed from the creature's soul. It was equivalent to a spirit. Luo Fan's perception cut into it. It was essentially no different from when he had cut into the spirit of the Air Maiden. However, at this moment, Luo Fan was not as gentle as he had been with the Air Maiden. Luo Fan had asked for the Air Maiden's permission before he cut his perception into her spirit. Afterwards, he had to tell the Air Maiden what he had learned. It was a fair trade. Under such circumstances, he naturally had to be cautious. He could not be too violent. He would make the Air Maiden uncomfortable. At this moment, the creature was Luo Fan's spoils of war. He had no responsibility for the creature. He did not need to think about how the Air Maiden felt. He could do whatever he wanted. Therefore, his act of invading the pill was rough, direct, and simple. It was almost like when he had absorbed the origin of the star fields of chaotic strife. He used the quickest method to get what he wanted. Under these circumstances, the invasion of perception was like a red-hot iron rod stabbing into the chest of an ordinary person. There was only endless pain. There was no way he could feel comfort or warmth like the Air Maiden. Feeling such an irresistible pain, the creature opened its mouth. Its eyes almost popped out of their sockets, and its entire face became deathly pale. The power that had been completely restricted by Luo Fan under the severe pain even exceeded its strength, producing a slight fluctuation. Although it was directly suppressed by Luo Fan's power, it was enough to see how many times stronger its power had been at that moment than before. There was no need to think too much about how terrifying the pain was to be able to trigger such a powerful force. Luo Fan did not care about the creature's reaction. As long as the creature was still alive, his plan would not be hindered. When he sent his perception into the pill, the situation inside was beyond his expectations. It was not a solid existence, nor was it chaotic like the souls of ordinary living beings. Instead, it was another pill. There was a small gap between this pill and the outer layer. These gaps were filled with countless mysterious lights. These mysterious lights were formed from the combination of Yuan Qi and the power of the soul. They were extremely powerful. On the surface of the inner pellet, there were also countless runes of laws and laws. Moreover, these runes were even denser and more complicated than the outer pellet. This made the entire pellet even tougher than the outer pellet, and it was even more compatible with the laws of the outside world and the cloth of laws. It's actually this kind of structure. If it's like this, then as long as there are 108 layers, the lines imprinted on the pill should be able to approach the origin of the void. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Chapter 871. Previously, in the 6 Absolute Nebula, Luo Fan had used the destroyed leader to find the core of the 6 Absolute Nebula because of this. Clearly, the Lord of Destruction belonged to the latter. The creature in front of him seemed to belong to the former. This was something that Luo Fan had not expected. It was definitely a pleasant surprise. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan's perception drilled into the pill in front of him again. In an instant, the creature felt an unbearable pain, and the power in its body shook. After passing through the wall of the pill, a new pill appeared in front of Luo Fan. The imprint lines on it were much more complicated and mysterious than the previous one. This change made Luo Fan even more certain of his previous thoughts. He could not help but be overjoyed as his perception continued to drill in. As he continued to drill in, after his perception cut into the first layer of the pill, another layer of the pill would appear. The deeper he cut in, the smaller the pill became, and the more stable it became. This made Luo Fan need to use more strength to drill in. Naturally, it was not a problem for Luo Fan to use that little bit of power. It would not cause any hindrance to him. Although this creature was equivalent to the perishment realm, that was only in terms of power. His realm was still far inferior. Furthermore, Luo Fan had trillions of years of experience to support him. This creature was at most tens of millions of years old. The difference in their methods was like the difference between heaven and earth. Under such circumstances, how could this creature's soul completely resist the penetration of Luo Fan's perception? This effect of the pill becoming more stable did not affect Luo Fan at all, but it was different for the creature. The harder Luo Fan's perception cut into the pill, the more pain the creature felt in that instant. This pain came from the soul, and it could not be resisted at all. It could not even use unconsciousness to block out this pain. It could only endure this increasingly strong and unbearable pain over and over again. It was even to the extent that there were many times where it thought that its mind would collapse in the next instant and turn into a walking corpse amidst the pain. At that moment, the creature suddenly had a strange thought. If I hadn't cultivated this technique back then, I wouldn't have been able to cultivate it. Instead, I'll cultivate some other method to forge my spirit's soul into one. How great would that be? This continuous cutting process went on for 99 times. After the 99th cutting, what appeared in front of Luo Fan was no longer a pill. It was a blur. There are only 99 floors. What a pity. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. How could he not understand that this was the location of that creature's soul core? It was also the location of that creature's life source. It contained the creature's tens of millions of years of memories, its endless comprehension of time and space, and all the information of its life. It could be said, if Luo Fan wanted to control this creature, he only needed to control this blur, and he would be able to control everything. However, it was clear that the creature's greatest advantage to Luo Fan was the structure of its spirit and its memories. Luo Fan had no interest in controlling this creature at all. As such, Luo Fan abruptly sent his perception into the blur and directly flipped through the creature's memories as if he were flipping through a book. He flipped through its endless comprehension of time and space. This process, to that creature, this was an indescribable and unbearable humiliation. In the face of such humiliation, that creature would normally want nothing more than to die on the spot and self-detonate. However, after experiencing the pain of having his soul sprite pill penetrated 99 times, he suddenly realized that this kind of humiliation was not unbearable. In fact, he was even more willing to enjoy this kind of humiliation than to feel the pain of having his soul sprite pill penetrated again. Once this kind of mentality appeared, the creature felt even more humiliated, but there was nothing it could do. In fact, its body could not help but relax. Luo Fan did not care about the creature at all. He only carefully flipped through the creature's memories and the endless comprehension it had gained over the past tens of millions of years. During this process, his understanding of time and space increased at an unimaginable speed. The creature's cultivation method was a profound method that was directly imprinted with the origin of time and space. Its grade was in this entire time and space. It was definitely a top-notch existence. If it continued cultivating, when it constructed 108 layers of its spirit pill, it would naturally be able to embed itself into the origin of time and live and die together with it. It would be able to live as long as the world and shine as the sun and moon. It would also be able to control this time and space and possess all sorts of peerless divine might. However, at this moment, although the creature had accumulated power comparable to the destruction realm, it could not cultivate this method to completion. However, he was unable to cultivate this technique to perfection. He could only construct a 99-layer pill for his spirit. Through observing the entire process of this creature cultivating that cultivation method, Luo Fan had already vaguely understood how the origin of this space-time existed. With this gain, he could no longer be bothered to look at the various trivial matters in the creature's memories. With a thought and a guidance of his senses, the spirit pill at the bottom of the creature trembled. In an instant, it completely cut off its connection with the other pill layers, its life essence, its body, and its power. The moment these connections were cut off, the creature finally could not help but let out a shrill cry. Following this, the power around it gradually dissipated, and its body gradually became illusory. "You're so ruthless." During this process, it stared at Luo Fan hatefully and murmured those words. While the lines carved on the spirit pill at the bottom had not reached the level of the origin of time and space, it was only 9 layers away, but it still had some of the outline of the origin of time and space. Using it as a reference allowed Luo Fan to find the origin of time and space more easily. To Luo Fan, this was a reference, but to the creature, this was the core of its spirit. Even though it was just one layer of the 99 layers of the spirit pill, this layer had been compressed billions of times. Each time it was compressed, a portion of its spirit would be compressed inside. Now, this thin layer of the spirit pill contained almost 60% of its spirit. Moreover, the other 98 layers used this layer of pills as the foundation, and without this layer of pills, it would be impossible for them to survive. Without it, the other 98 layers would not be able to maintain their stability at all. They would gradually collapse and disintegrate. During this process, it would release endless power and destroy everything it came into contact with. The result of this was, after losing the 99th layer, which was the innermost layer of the spirit pill, the creature would definitely die. Not to mention that the indescribable pain he felt when the connection between the 99th layer and the other layers was violently cut off. It was tens of millions of times more painful than the total pain he felt when he tried to invade the 99th layer with his senses. Under such pain, if the creature's endurance had not been greatly increased due to the final radiance of the setting sun, its mind would have already collapsed. It had been turned into a walking corpse by the pain. It was no wonder it said that Luo Fan was too ruthless. Luo Fan did not feel any psychological fluctuations from this curse, which was filled with endless hatred. He did not take it to heart, since he was determined to destroy them. Even if they were real living beings, he would not be stingy to use any means to deal with them. Moreover, these were only projections of living beings, although they were real to a certain extent. It was not wrong to treat them as fake. After withdrawing his right hand from the creature's head, there was now a fist-sized pill engraved with countless complicated and profound lines on it. The creature's life force had already been completely drained. Its entire body had withered like a pile of meat. How could one see any signs of life? As Luo Fan took out the pill layer, the creature's life source had already collapsed due to the spirit's self-attack. It had died, and its soul had dissipated. Holding the pill, Luo Fan squeezed it casually, but he could not pinch it. He felt that the pill was unimaginably hard, as if it was the toughest substance in the universe. At this moment, when the pill appeared in his hand, the laws that were as dense as cloth wrapped around the pill in an extremely mysterious way. It wrapped around the pill in an extremely mysterious way, causing the pill to seem ethereal, as if it could melt into nothingness at any time and disappear without a trace. This ethereal feeling was the manifestation of the pill's incomparable compatibility with the laws. He lifted his foot and stomped lightly. An indescribable wave swept towards the creature's body in front of him. That body was originally extremely dense. Even the power of the Great Perfection stage could not harm it. In that instant, it seemed to be condensed from smoke, turning into countless wisps of green smoke that gradually dissipated. In the end, it completely fused with the viscous liquid of the acquired origin chi of heaven and earth, as if it had never appeared. After doing this, Luo Fan took a light step forward. His body gradually became ethereal. He had activated the power view. As his body entered the power view, it was difficult for ordinary creatures to detect him. With the disappearance of Luo Fan, the entire settlement within a radius of several light years no longer had any signs of life, turning into an empty expanse. At this moment, only a short 3 days had passed since Luo Fan stepped into the settlement. After entering the power view, the world that Luo Fan saw was countless times richer than the world that he saw with his normal vision. All sorts of strange powers were displayed in front of him in a colorful display. Endless laws were like curtains, almost obscuring his vision. If it were not for the fact that this vision could not be obscured by anything, he might really have gained nothing from it. However, the endless power mixed with such dense laws also clouded his vision, making it difficult for him to distinguish what the extreme power was and what the source of the void was. Sighing slightly, Luo Fan could not help but rejoice that he had made the first move to capture that creature. If he did not have the memories of that creature and the 99th level soul spirit pill, it would have taken him at least 100 years to find that extreme power, find the source of the land of nothingness, and then find its core. Evidently, Luo Fan was not extravagant enough to casually waste 100 years in a place where the flow of time was 1/10,000th of Earth's. Now that he had the memories and the pill, the situation was different. In the memories and the pill, there were traces of the source of time and space left on it. Even if it was incomplete, the difficulty of finding what he was looking for had been reduced by countless times. Although the laws and laws were as dense as cloth, they were clearly not cloth. But in reality, it was clearly not a piece of cloth. Every strand of the laws, the position of the laws, the connection between them, and the interaction between them were all extremely exquisite. It was extremely profound. However, it was not like cloth that was only mechanically intersecting with each other. Under such circumstances, there were naturally many different distinctions on this so-called silk cloth made of laws. The distinctions formed by these different structures were just like the patterns embroidered on ordinary silk cloth. It was not difficult to find the pattern if one wanted to find the pattern. With the creature's memories and the soul pill layer, it was not difficult to find it. More than half a month later, Luo Fan finally found a specific structure among the cloth-like laws and laws. It complemented the laws and laws in the void when he first stepped into this checkpoint, faintly forming a complete and integrated system. This system was the original form of the countless lines imprinted on the surface of the pill. It was also the source of time and space that the creature had sensed when it comprehended Tao. When he discovered this system, Luo Fan suddenly felt that his perception had increased extraordinarily. The world in his eyes was instantly divided into countless layers. The laws and laws that were originally as dense as cloth had originally formed layers of nested systems. It was just that this nesting was too tight. The remaining gaps were simply too small, so small that even Luo Fan could not sense them. This was why Luo Fan looked at it like a complete piece of cloth. At this very moment, due to the extraordinary elevation of his perception, these tiny gaps seemed to have been magnified countless times. Finally, he was able to completely distinguish the various levels, allowing Luo Fan to tell at a glance that these laws and principles were a system. These laws and principles did not have a direct relationship with each other, nor did they directly influence each other. So that's how it is. The ripples I sensed earlier were actually the circulation between the two complementary laws. No wonder I couldn't find the source of the fluctuation after I stepped into this space-time. Luo Fan sighed leisurely, and his eyes were full of understanding. Even though the 3,336 challenge caused a lot of difficulties for Luo Fan, he was still able to clear it. But at the same time, it also gave him great benefits. Most importantly, he discovered that power could be hidden by splitting it up. This greatly expanded his understanding of power. It was as if a brand new door had been opened in front of him, one that led to a deeper and more profound level of power. Even if he didn't get anything else, just this harvest alone was enough. It was already enough for Luo Fan to waste more than a month's time. With a slight thought, his eyes followed the laws and principles system that complemented the other space-time. He directly passed through the layers of space-time barriers and saw the laws and principles system that complemented these laws and principles completely in the void of space-time. The moment he saw the whole thing clearly, the extreme power hidden behind the two laws and principles system that divided the void into two parts suddenly appeared in front of Luo Fan's eyes. This power was extremely mysterious and powerful. It connected the two spacetimes and balanced the two spacetimes. It allowed the two spacetimes that were originally at two extremes to transform and circulate with each other in a mysterious way, forming an incomparably complete and stable whole. Looking at this power, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and his body slowly and quickly followed this power toward its source. He was extremely fast. Even though the space-time he was in was tens of thousands of light-years wide, when he entered the power perspective, this distance could only be converted into a kind of spatial power. The speed of his movement did not depend on other factors, but how strong the spatial power he could cross. The stronger the spatial power he could cross, the faster his speed would be. After comprehending the source of space-time and seeing the extreme power, his ability to cross space-time and spatial power had already reached an unimaginable level. Therefore, in just a few dozen breaths, he crossed tens of thousands of light years and directly arrived in the 9 major regions of space-time. The region furthest from the region he was in was also the most prosperous among the 9 major regions, and it had the most powerful vitality, living beings. This region was countless times more prosperous than the region where Luo Fan had first entered this space-time. He roughly sensed that there was a gathering point that was several light years wide almost every few dozen light years. In total, there were almost 100,000 great perfection realm beings among them. There were also hundreds or thousands of existences that were comparable to the Terminators in terms of power. Among the many gathering points, there was one that was several times larger than the others. The most powerful vitality living being in the entire space-time was there. This living being was more than 10,000 times more powerful than the king that Luo Fan had casually needed. Judging from the power it possessed, it was even thousands of times more powerful than Luo Fan's current strength. What was even more frightening was that the source of the extreme power seemed to be on this powerful living being. Chapter 872. Although it was so powerful, Luo Fan was not the slightest bit timid when facing such a creature, nor did he have the slightest thought of retreating. The reason for this was simple. He could sense that this being's essence was not as high as his. It could be said that while this being was thousands of times more powerful than him, it did not comprehend the profoundness of the void-comprehending realm at all. It did not even comprehend the profoundness of the perishment realm. Its life essence was still limited to the great perfection realm. If Luo Fan was only an innate grand Luo, he would naturally be like an ant when facing a supreme being that was thousands of times more powerful than him. He might not even be able to resist the pressure from its aura, let alone fight it. However, it was clear that Luo Fan was not an innate grand Luo. He was already a perishment realm being. Moreover, he was a perishment realm being that could already see the direction of the void-comprehending realm from afar. As a perishment realm being, its life essence was more powerful than any innate grand Luo. It could be tens of thousands of times more powerful than most innate grand Luo with the same amount of power. Under such circumstances, although the vitality being was thousands of times more powerful than Luo Fan, he was not afraid at all. He did not think that he could not deal with it. Luo Fan stopped outside the gathering point of the strongest being and carefully observed it. Although he was not afraid of that being, it still had power that was thousands of times more powerful than him. He could not be reckless. One had to know that a moment of carelessness could result in the death of one's life. After a few breaths, when Luo Fan had gained something and was about to avoid the sentry post and enter the gathering point, an extremely violent aura suddenly descended from the void. It directly enveloped Luo Fan, who was observing time and space with his power and comprehending the profoundness of the world. Luo Fan never thought that he would be discovered when he observed the world with his power. He never thought that a being could use its aura on him when he was in such a state. As such, he was instinctively on guard. However, his guard was not very strong. The aura that came out of nowhere was unimaginably powerful. Although the will that was activating the aura was only at the great perfection realm, its amount was unimaginable. As such, in the blink of an eye, Luo Fan's instinctive defense was instantly destroyed, and his figure was directly blasted back to the normal space-time. The perspective of his eyes was also directly separated from the perspective of power. I didn't expect to fail so easily. That was the only thought in Luo Fan's mind. After returning to normal time and space, his body became illusory, and he directly dispersed the aura that was still acting on him. The aura was terrifyingly powerful in terms of quantity, and it was enough to destroy any great perfection realm being. It was, after all, and the will that was activating it was only at great perfection realm. It was simply difficult to display the full power of this imposing aura. It was not difficult for Luo Fan to remove it. Hey, I didn't expect that not only does it have a strange invisibility ability, but also has such a mysterious defense ability. At this moment, a voice that sounded like the wind leisurely passed into Luo Fan's ears. When Luo Fan heard this, he knew that his previous guess was correct. This was using the aura to oppress him and force him out of the power vision. Sure enough, it was the most powerful vitality being in the gathering point in front of him. Its power was 100 times stronger than his, but its nature was far inferior to his. I didn't expect to be able to find me. It seems that the being is indeed on you. Luo Fan sighed, as if he was distressed. His words were also spoken in a language that sounded like the wind, but there was no need to worry that the being wouldn't understand. How arrogant! You were the one who wantonly tortured the king in the Eastern Barbarian Shi domain a few days ago, right? I didn't expect you to not be one of us. The voice that sounded like the wind continued to pass into Luo Fan's ears. Then, a humanoid shadow gradually condensed in front of Luo Fan. This humanoid shadow was only 3 feet tall and had the appearance of an ordinary-looking middle-aged man. Its eyes seemed to be very confused, but also seemed to contain infinite wisdom. It was as if he didn't see anything, yet it was as if he could see everything in the universe. It displayed an unimaginable ability. Looking at this shadow, Luo Fan couldn't help but frown. This performance clearly meant that this being had already integrated itself into the entire space-time. It was breathing the vitality of the entire space-time, breathing the laws and laws of the space-time at any time. It could also borrow the power of the space-time at any time. This performance clearly meant that the void had to some extent become one with this being. In other words, from a certain point of view, this being had become the embodiment of the void. In other words, the resistance of the world would only appear when he destroyed the core of the forbidden area. And in this checkpoint, in this void, the resistance came from the vitality creature in front of him. If he wanted to destroy the core, he would have to defeat the vitality creature first. Is this the trend of the next levels? Or is this just special? This was the reason why Luo Fan frowned, and not because he felt that the vitality being was difficult to defeat. If it was just this level, then it would be fine. He still had absolute confidence in defeating the vitality being. However, if it wasn't just this level, but the trend of the next levels, then it would probably be quite troublesome. Because the further the levels were, the more realistic the projection of the forbidden area would be, and the more powerful the living being would be. If there was a level that reached the perishment realm, then it would be a fatal problem for the numerous Khanate Grand Luo cultivators and Luo Fan. This was because the levels were all forbidden areas, and their overall power was countless times greater than Luo Fan's. Even if he fused with a living being, due to the limits of the living being's endurance, he might end up like the vitality being in front of him, becoming thousands of times more powerful than Luo Fan. Facing such great power, Luo Fan could only rely on his higher cultivation level and higher life essence. If this bit of advantage was eliminated, then it would be almost impossible for him to defeat the vitality being. With this worry, Luo Fan suddenly lost interest in continuing to waste time in this level. He could not be bothered to waste time with the vitality being. He said indifferently, "We must fight to the death. Prepare yourself." As he spoke, he did not wait for the vitality being to reply. He raised his hand and slapped forward. With this slap, his palm drew an incomparably mysterious trajectory, leaving behind countless afterimages in the void that would last for a long time. Before the phantom could even react, Yi Shiwen's palm slammed into the void. Before the illusory figure could react, it landed on its body. This illusory figure was a clone of the vitality being. The power contained within it was not any weaker than Luo Fan's, and was enough to wipe out all the experts in the space-time. However, such a clone could not resist at all in front of Luo Fan. With a slap from Luo Fan, it turned into smoke and dissipated in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. "How dare you?" A cold snort sounded in Luo Fan's ears. As the cold snort sounded, A power that was 100 times more powerful than Luo Fan's came crashing down towards Luo Fan from the void. The cold snort was naturally the vitality being's voice. Of course, this power was also released by it. Its own power was only a few thousand times that of Luo Fan's. At this moment, it released a power that was 100 times more powerful than Luo Fan's. Evidently, it took him quite seriously. Looks like the power of the Forbidden Land can release greater power when it enters the body of a living being, but it has also been tainted with the arrogant characteristics of living beings. Previously, it thought that as long as it had the same power as me, it would be able to defeat me. After failing, it was still not willing to use its full power. It actually restrained itself and only used 1/10 of its power. When Luo Fan saw this, he smiled slightly and relaxed a little. If this power that was 100 times more powerful than his was condensed enough, it would not be able to transmit the feeling of being able to cover the sky to Luo Fan. Since it covered the sky and covered the earth, it naturally meant that it was not condensed enough. And if it was not condensed enough, no matter how powerful it would not be a threat to Luo Fan. Looking at the power that covered the sky and covered the earth, Luo Fan only smiled. He raised his hand and pointed, releasing an insignificant power that was completely the opposite of the nature of that power. Like a spirit snake, it wriggled in the void, bypassing a mysterious and extremely profound trajectory. It directly drilled into the power that was 100 times stronger than Luo Fan's own. That extremely mysterious quantum force continued to drill through the energy. Not long after, it had already drilled into a certain mysterious key point. With a slight tremble, it exploded. This power was not even a 10 millionth of the power that covered the sky and covered the earth. But when this power exploded at that key point, the power that covered the sky and covered the earth fiercely smashed down towards Luo Fan suddenly shook. All of a sudden, like a pile of sand, it collapsed with a loud bang and dissipated in all directions, turning into a cool breeze that made Luo Fan feel rather comfortable. Luo Fan had already expected this to happen after he released that power. Thus, after he released that power, he did not hesitate at all. With a jolt of his body, he had already crossed the void and directly entered the gathering point. The Vitality life form was originally extremely confident in the power that it had released, thinking that the difference of 100 times was enough to make up for the difference in all other techniques. However, it did not expect that the attack that it had absolute confidence in would be so easily disintegrated by its opponent, who used power that was tens of millions of times less than its own. It could not help but be slightly stunned. In that moment, Luo Fan had already crossed the void and arrived in front of it. The Vitality life form was also located in an egg-shaped building. However, this egg-shaped building was different from other egg-shaped buildings. It flickered with mysterious light, and there were countless tiny vein patterns swimming on the egg-shaped building's surface, as if they were evolving some supreme mystery. Luo Fan was extremely familiar with these vein patterns. They were the nomological structure of the origin of space-time, and it was also where half of the origin of the entire Voidland was located. The existence of these vein patterns made the egg-shaped building extremely sturdy, and it possessed indescribable defensive abilities. If any living being did not understand the profoundness of these vein patterns, they could only enter and exit the egg-shaped building with the permission of the owner. However, this clearly did not include Luo Fan. Luo Fan's understanding of these vein patterns was even more profound than the Vitality life form that had carved them. So how could these vein patterns stop him? However, he easily entered the egg-shaped building and came face to face with the Vitality life form, who was sitting cross-legged and had merged with space-time. The middle-aged man's expression changed slightly. He no longer held back his aura, and it directly pressed down on Luo Fan, who was standing in front of him. The aura was extremely powerful. It was not just his own aura, but it also contained the might of the entire space-time, and even the entire Voidland's might was contained within it. If an ordinary golden immortal realm cultivator encountered such an imposing aura, that cultivator would absolutely be transformed into powder at the first possible moment and perish. Their souls would be destroyed. However, the person here was Luo Fan. Although the aura was powerful enough to turn incarnate Grand Luo into dust, his expression did not change at all. His body trembled slightly. The aura did not seem to be able to find him. It kept lingering around him, but it could not land on him at all. I've already tried it once. Do you still think it'll work on me? Luo Fan shook his head. He took a step forward and poked the Vitality Life Form's forehead with his right hand. After all, the Yuan Qi creature was not weak. When it realized that its aura was useless, it immediately gave up. When it realized that its aura was ineffective, it shook its body and wrapped its right hand with an extremely powerful force that caused the surrounding space to distort intensely. It raised its hand to meet Luo Fan's right hand. The power gathered on the Vitality Life Form's right hand was hundreds of times more powerful than all of Luo Fan's power. Although it was not as condensed as Luo Fan's power, and its control was not as superb as Luo Fan's, such a head-on collision was not something that Luo Fan could withstand. Therefore, he could only turn his right hand. His body swayed, and he drew a simple but extremely exquisite trajectory. He dodged the Vitality Life Form's right hand and came to its side. He suddenly poked the Vitality Life Form's ribs. An extremely powerful force and extremely condensed power followed Luo Fan's poke and drilled into the Vitality Life Form's body in a frenzy, trying to crush its insides. It was a pity that the Vitality Life Form's power was too powerful. Because the power released from the outside world had already left its body, it had to rely on the Vitality Life Form's will to control it. Naturally, it was limited by the Vitality Life Form's essence, and the power within its body did not need to leave its body at all. It circulated naturally and did not need much willpower to perfectly circulate. Thus, it was much less restricted by the Vitality Life Form's will than when it was released from its body. This kind of restriction would be enough to decide the outcome of the battle. It was enough to determine the outcome of the battle, allowing Luo Fan to easily subdue him. But at this moment, the Vitality Life Form's power was thousands of times more powerful than Luo Fan's. This level of power was enough to overcome the restriction. After Luo Fan's power blasted into the Vitality Life Form's body, it was unable to maintain its autonomy. It was directly dispersed by the power circulating within its body and could not affect the Vitality Life Form in the slightest. So that's how it is. Luo Fan frowned. He turned around and dodged the Vitality Life Form's next round of attacks. He turned around and blasted again. A powerful force poured into the Vitality Life Form's aperture on its back. The result was the same as when he had struck its ribs. As soon as the force entered its body, it was disintegrated by the endless power circulating within its body. It was unable to produce any effect at all. The Vitality Life Form finally reacted and said with a faint smile, "You're too weak. Even if I sit still and let you attack, you won't be able to harm me." Luo Fan could not help but frown when he heard its words. Although the Vitality Life Form's words were unpleasant to the ear, they were the truth. As long as the power in its body circulated naturally, even if it stood there and let him attack it, it would be difficult for his power to break through its defenses and harm it. Clearly, if he could not harm it, he would not be able to destroy the void's origin energy, and he would not be able to pass this trial. It could be said that the problem was that he was stuck here, and it was difficult to break through. Although the Vitality Life Form said that it was clearly impossible for it to really sit there and let Luo Fan attack it. It attacked hundreds of times and found that the difference between its willpower and Luo Fan's was too great. Its attacks could not hit him at all. In fact, even if it did hit him, the power released from its body would be too scattered, and there would be a huge flaw. It would be difficult for it to cause real damage to him. With a thought, Zhou Weiqing touched somewhere and took out a black stone. He poured power into it, and the stone exploded with dazzling light. It directly floated in the air and gave off endless power. It was actually a strange item. Although it was not a magic treasure or a magic tool, it had powers similar to a magic treasure or magic tool. Zhou Weiqing did not know what kind of power it had. He only knew that this item was not ordinary and could not be underestimated. When Luo Fan saw this item, his mind trembled, and such a thought flashed through his mind. So I have walked into the wrong path and stepped onto the wrong path. Fortunately, it is not too late to wake up now. No matter what kind of power the strange item that the Vitality life form had escaped from had, it should be beneficial to the Vitality life form's current situation. After deducing from this aspect, the result was out. This Yuan Qi creature did not lack any power at all. What lacked was its own intrinsic quality. This deficiency made it difficult for it to fully unleash the power of its own power. Taking out this item at this time was naturally because the Vitality creature believed that this item could change the current situation. It could unleash the full might of its power and allow it to complete the task of completely erasing Luo Fan.